Hey guys, tonight we slip quietly into a world where reclining on plush couches while being fed grapes and honey cakes was less of a fantasy and more of a nightly reality, well, at least for the lucky ones in ancient Rome. Picture yourself walking into the atrium of a grand Roman domus as golden lamplight flickers off mosaics, and the air hums with 1,000 subtle cues of status, wealth, and well-rehearsed excess. Servants scuttle by, their arms full of garlands, platters, and ewers of wine. Somewhere in the distance, a flute trills. Your stomach grumbles with hope. But a quick glance at the reclining senators and coiffed matrons makes it obvious. You'll need more than an appetite to survive tonight. The rules here are strange, the food even stranger, and frankly, you probably won't survive this if you can't keep a straight face when the first course arrives. Peacock tongues or jellyfish. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. But only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And as always, I want to know where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. Drop your location and local time in the comments so we can see just how far this sleepy caravan travels. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge past the threshold, sandals scuffing against cool marble. Instantly, you're surrounded by the warm, oddly spicy smell of olive oil, mingled with garum, the infamous Roman fish sauce that, let's face it, smells a bit like someone's gym bag had a baby with the ocean. The doorman sizes you up with the world-weary look of someone who's seen too many new faces try too hard. You're greeted not with a handshake, but a slightly suspicious sniff, and a very formal nod. Down to his mainstream historical fact, the Roman banquet, or convivium, wasn't just dinner. It was an orchestrated show of power, generosity, and good breeding. Wealthy Romans used these feasts to cement alliances, show off their riches, and maybe, just maybe, test your ability to hold your liquor and your dignity at the same time. Historians still argue whether these events were more about genuine hospitality or relentless social jockeying, with the scale often tipping toward the latter, especially once the wine began to flow.
You were immediately swept into the madness of the evening's preparations. On your left, a slave drapes fragrant garlands over each doorway. Someone thrusts a bowl of rosewater at you and expects you to bathe your hands, a little ritual meant to symbolically cleanse you from the grime of the outside world, as if a splash of floral water can erase the real stink of Roman streets.
Fringe tidbit, guests sometimes rub themselves with scented oils, not just for pleasure, but as a flex, a statement that, yes, I can afford olive oil that doesn't go on salad.
The triclinium, or dining room, sprawls before you, lined with 3 couches. Because of course a chair is much too boring, you're assigned a spot by the host's major domo who, let's be honest, gives you the "are you important enough" to recline near the fish sauce test before waving you toward the least prestigious corner.
Don't take it personally. In Rome, seating charts were basically gladiator battles with cushions. Your fellow diners are already sizing each other up. One senator fingers the embroidery on his toga, eyeing the gold thread in his neighbour's. An ambitious equestrian launches into a story about his villa's latest mosaic floor, barely pausing to breathe. You notice that nobody touches the bread until the host does, a fact worth remembering unless you want to be forever known as that guy who started the meal early. Trust me, the Romans will remember. The food starts to arrive, but don't expect the main course yet. Instead, servants parade by with appetizers, eggs, olives, and suspicious-looking pickled vegetables that might just be yesterday's leftovers in disguise. A chorus of polite murmurs rises. Nobody wants to seem too eager, but you'd better believe everyone's watching how much you take. One false move, and you'll be branded the greedy Gaul, until next Saturnalia. And then the host appears, dripping with jewelry and self-satisfaction, delivering a speech that's half welcome, half subtle threat. If you're smart, you'll laugh at his jokes, praise the decor, and nod gravely when he launches into a monologue about the correct way to grow figs. Historians still debate whether the spirit of the convivium was real or just a mask everyone wore, waiting for a chance to gossip once the dessert trays were cleared.
The evening swells around you. Wine is poured, but only after it's diluted with water, since drinking it straight is considered barbaric.
The Greeks started that trend, and the Romans ran with it, because apparently hangovers were only for the uncivilized. You pretend not to notice as your neighbor sneakily switches cups with a servant, trying to avoid the host's special vintage, a trick as old as Rome itself. Fringe tidbit. Some hosts went so far as to release pet birds or small animals into the triclinium for entertainment, hoping to liven up the conversation and distract from the more questionable menu items. If you feel a feathered blur dart past your ear, try not to look too startled, unless you want to become tonight's running joke. As the laughter rises, so does the level of friendly sabotage. A guest drops a fig in someone's lap and blames the cat. Another feigns outrage when a slave accidentally spills wine on his tunic, secretly thrilled for an excuse to display his "oh, this old thing" attitude. You watch amazed as the rules flex and snap the mood, strict enough to keep order, loose enough for everyone to believe they're getting away with something. Historians still argue about the true spirit of these banquets. Were they elegant exercises in civilization, or barely disguised food fights for the elite? The truth, as you're learning, probably sits somewhere between the peacock tongues and the spilled garum, just out of reach, endlessly debated, and honestly, a lot messier than any marble statue would suggest. As you slip deeper into the Roman domus, the triclinium comes alive in flickering lamplight, the heart of tonight's spectacle. This is where the hierarchy of Roman society is displayed with the subtlety of a slapstick comedy and the calculation of a chess grandmaster. Before you can even worry about the food, you face your first challenge, finding your place, not just metaphorically, but literally, on the sprawling arrangement of couches. The room itself is arranged with theatrical flair. 3 long couches form a U-shape around a low table, and each spot is a message to the rest of the room. The host, beaming and radiating power, occupies the central place on the left couch, the lectus medius. His most honored guest gets the spot immediately to his right, while everyone else is ranked from most important to at least you're indoors. Tonight, you're ushered to the lower end of the lowest couch, a subtle but unmistakable nudge that you're neither a political heavyweight nor particularly amusing yet. Mainstream historical fact: seating was everything. In the Roman world, who reclined where mattered, almost as much as who was invited at all. Where you lay determined who poured your wine, who could whisper secrets in your ear, and who would be first to taste the best bits from the communal platter. Sometimes, if you wanted to show respect, or more often your lack of it, you'd intentionally assign a rival to the foot of the couch, close to the dogs, far from the action, and near enough to the door to suggest they could be replaced by a better guest at any moment. You recline awkwardly, propped on your left elbow, as tradition demands, right hand free to pluck morsels from the ever-rotating dishes. It's harder than it looks. Your arm starts to ache, your toga keeps slipping, and you realize that dignified eating is a lot trickier than the statues suggest. A senator nearby grumbles about a cramp, but refuses to adjust after all. A true Roman never lets discomfort disrupt the show. Fringe tidbit: the triclinium wasn't just for comfort, it was a statement. The fanciest banqueting rooms boasted mosaic floors, marble fountains, and sometimes even hidden pipes to cool the air with scented water. At the wealthiest tables, cushions might be stuffed with feathers from exotic birds, and the table itself would groan under the weight of silver platters and cut glassware. But historians still argue whether these excesses were genuinely enjoyed, or merely endured, with some sources claiming guests would sneak off to the garden just for a break from the civilized discomfort. You can't help but notice the strict etiquette. You're meant to avoid crossing your legs, since that's considered uncouth. And speaking with your mouth full is right out, though. Ironically, laughter is encouraged, especially at the host's jokes. If you find yourself nodding sagely at anecdotes about hunting trips and laughing on cue at stories of drunken poets, even if you suspect half the room is doing the same just to avoid being noticed for the wrong reasons. One of the slaves, trained to a perfect silent efficiency, glides by to refill your wine cup. It's a delicate art. Too much, and you risk being labelled a lush. Too little, and you seem ungrateful. As the wine flows, so do the stories. Your neighbour regales you with a tale of a banquet where a peacock escaped the kitchen and caused a minor scandal by flying straight through the dessert course, upsetting cakes, guests, and a particularly humourless magistrate. The host occasionally interrupts with pointed questions. What news from your estate? Have you seen the new baths in Pompeii? Forcing everyone to display wit, humility, and just enough deference to keep the mood buoyant. The wrong answer might win you a seat closer to the dog bowl next time.
Laughter ripples around the room at the expense of one unlucky merchant, who last week brought a barbarian delicacy, boiled turnip in honey. Let's just say the memory still haunts the lower couches.
Suddenly, a minor scandal erupts. A young guest, too new, too eager, tries to help himself to a dish before it's been sampled by the honoured guest. Gasps flutter through the air. The host raises an eyebrow, and a seasoned matron covers the gaffe with a deft change of subject, launching into a story about the last Saturnalia and the accidental release of a flock of geese in the atrium. You silently thank the gods for the distraction. Still, you resolve to watch the order of service more closely. In Rome, social survival means tracking who gets the best morsels and when. Historians still argue about the purpose of such rigid seating. Some claim it reinforced Rome's intricate class structure, making every dinner a rehearsal for public life. Others suggest it was about efficiency, so that servers could quickly identify and cater to the most important guests, without confusion. But everyone agrees a misplaced guest or a breach of protocol could haunt one's reputation for months. The couches fill with shifting conversations. One group debates philosophy, Stoics and Epicureans volleying arguments like tennis balls, while another group flirts outrageously, passing notes under the table. The background music swells, a lyre, a soft drum, maybe even the flutter of a distant flute. And through it all, the seating plan holds firm, until someone, inevitably, tests its boundaries. A mischievous senator swaps places, hoping to get closer to the dessert, and the host pretends not to notice, but you see the glint in his eye. Even the sternest rules are made for bending, especially after the third round of wine. By the time the first course is cleared, you've learnt to navigate the triclinium's code. Know your place, mind your manners, and never get too comfortable. Because at a Roman banquet, the most dangerous seat is always the one you think is secure. Your elbow is numb, your back aches from holding the proper pose, and you're beginning to understand why so many ancient Romans spent as much on cushions as they did on peacock. Now, just when you think you've conquered the art of reclining, you catch a sidelong glance from a noblewoman 2 couches over and realise there's a whole other test ahead. You're clothed, you tug self-consciously at your tunic, suddenly aware that in Rome, what you wear to dinner is almost as important as what you eat. The triclinium is a sea of fabrics and colours, each choice screaming something about rank, wealth, and, if you're unlucky, last year's trends. The men closest to the host lounge in crisp, blinding white togas, the classic symbol of Roman citizenship, while further down, senators flaunt purple stripes so wide they threaten to trip passing slaves. The equestrians wear slightly less elaborate togas, but their shoes polished red, with crescent moon buckles, gleam with quiet arrogance. Mainstream historical fact, the Roman toga wasn't just formal wear, it was the social passport of the city. A white toga signalled elderhood, citizenship, and good standing, while purple or gold embroidery marked the highest ranks. Even the material mattered. Coarse wool for the plebs, delicate imported cloth for those with coin. Women, for their part, wore layered stolas and pellis, each pinned with carefully selected brooches and drenched in perfumes meant to outshine the feast's garum. The effect is dazzling, and maybe a little overwhelming. You catch a whiff of rosewater and another of pungent myrrh, battling the less romantic smells of roast boar and warm bodies. Your neighbour, a merchant with more ambition than fashion sense, nervously adjusts his old faded tunic, then realizing his error, tries to hide it behind a borrowed napkin. Further up the couch, a senator's wife flashes a bracelet crusted with emeralds, and the light dances across the mosaics. Fringe tidbit, some Romans even hired dressers just for banquets, experts in arranging the folds of a toga or pinning a palla to fall just so. For especially grand occasions, men and women might change outfits between courses, each new look sparking murmurs and envy. One poet even joked that the real entertainment was seeing if anyone's sandal would break during a particularly lively dance.
Historians still argue whether Roman guests took fashion rules seriously, or privately, resented them as much as modern partygoers do.
Letters from the period are full of snide comments about ill-fitting togas and mismatched sandals, suggesting that no one was above the odd sartorial disaster. In fact, being too overdressed or too underdressed could mark you for ridicule, and the last thing anyone wanted was to become the butt of the after-dinner jokes. You do your best to fit in, pulling your tunic smooth and carefully arranging your napkin over your lap, never around your neck because that's considered laughably childish. Around you, conversation swirls. One matron compliments another's pearl hairpins, only to murmur to her neighbour that pearls have gone terribly out of style this season. You're starting to understand why Roman banquets could feel as tense as Senate meetings. The shoes are a spectacle in themselves. Slaves, forbidden fine footwear, go barefoot and pad softly on the cool mosaics.
The patricians show off sandals with gilded straps and carved soles.
Some women wear slippers dyed deep green with imported dyes. Rumour has it, the most fashionable shade changes faster than the empire's borders. You catch sight of a few guests discreetly removing uncomfortable shoes beneath the table, only to slip them back on for any walk across the room. Your host, of course, is a study in carefully orchestrated elegance. His tunic is trimmed with a band of gold, his cloak draped just so, and his signet ring catches the candlelight with every grand gesture. He offers a pointed toast to the refined company assembled, which everyone knows is code for "I see you trying, and I'll decide later if you succeeded."
You raise your cup with the others, doing your best not to slosh wine on your knee. It's not all nerves, though. Some guests use the banquets as a chance to show off humour and personality through their outfits.
The household poet arrives in a tunic embroidered with tiny laurel leaves, in honour of victory over indigestion. A famously eccentric merchant appears in an outlandish saffron robe, declaring himself Jupiter's lost cousin. Laughter and gentle teasing ripple down the couches, breaking the tension. The rules of dress extend to personal grooming. Hair must be oiled and curled for men, pinned and perfumed for women. Shaggy beards are out unless you're a philosopher, and even then only if you stroke it while discussing Stoic paradoxes. Jewellery must be tastefully displayed, unless of course you're rich enough not to care, in which case the more bangles, the better. You spot one woman with earrings the size of figs, and wonder how her earlobes survive the weight. A few seasoned guests keep spare brooches and ribbons tucked into their belts, just in case. You watch in awe as a young nobleman repairs a snapped sandal strap with a strand of gold thread borrowed from a neighbour's hem. He grins and raises his cup to the room's applause, proving that resourcefulness is, sometimes, more valuable than a perfect outfit.
Historians still debate whether these displays were honest efforts at beauty or a never-ending battle of one-upmanship. Some records describe the envy, the admiration, and occasionally the misfortune of a wine-stained cloak that becomes the talk of the city for weeks.
As the evening stretches on, the candles burn lower and the guests begin to relax. A little less formal, a little more themselves. You catch a reflection in a polished plate, creased but content, and just eccentric enough to survive another round in the endless Roman parade of style and spectacle.
The mood inside the triclinium shifts as the last rays of sunlight vanish, replaced by the flicker of a dozen oil lamps. It's time for the pre-dinner rituals, those little ceremonies that for the Romans are every bit as important as the meal itself.
If you thought you could just dig in, think again.
The opening acts at a Roman banquet are so theatrical, you half expect a drum roll and a chorus line of geese. First comes the ceremonial hand-washing. Slaves glide between the couches, each holding a bronze basin and a pitcher of warm, perfumed water. You awkwardly extend your hands, and a stream of water cascades over your fingers, pooling in the basin below. The scent is sharp, rose water mixed with a hint of bay leaf, and for a moment you feel almost regal. But don't get too comfortable. The next guest to your right is already sneaking glances, checking to see if you have the right technique. Do you dry your hands on the provided linen, or, like a barbarian on your toga, hint, go for the linen, or mainstream historical fact. Washing before meals was both a hygiene practice and a social ritual in ancient Rome. For the elite, it signaled wealth, the ability to waste clean water and scented oils. But for all classes, it was a way to mark the transition from the dirt and business of the day to the pleasure of the evening's entertainment. Historians still argue whether these rituals sprang more from genuine cleanliness or social signalling, but either way, skipping them was a recipe for scandal. Once hands are clean, it's time for the garlanding. Slaves appear bearing trays of fresh flowers, violets, roses, even the occasional sprig of parsley. Each guest receives a garland to wear on their head, an oddly festive tradition that turns the stiffest senator into a garden sprite. You catch yourself stifling a laugh as a particularly grumpy magistrate is crowned with a lopsided wreath. One poet jokes that Romans invented garlands just to make everyone look equally ridiculous for the first 5 minutes, but there's method to this madness. The garlands are not only decorative, they're scented with herbs believed to ward off hangovers and keep the mind sharp as the wine begins to flow.
Fringe tidbit.
Some guests, worried about overindulging, would tuck rue or mint behind their ears, hoping for protection from the infamous after-effects of Roman hospitality. More than one noblewoman is rumoured to have hidden a clove of garlic in her garland, just in case. Next comes the anointing. A slave approaches, carrying a delicate bottle of perfumed oil. With a careful hand, she dabs your wrists and temples, the scent heady and sweet. The host calls for silence, as each guest is offered a turn. If you're especially favoured, you might get a drop on your brow, a gesture of welcome, but also a silent hint that you'd better be on your best behaviour. As you relax into the ritual, conversation turns to the day's events. The host regales the table with news of the latest gladiatorial match, his gestures leaving a faint trail of spiced myrrh in the air. The guests share tales of political intrigue, lost inheritances, and of course memorable banquets past. One involving a monkey, a runaway cheese wheel, and a senator's ruined sandals is a favourite. Suddenly, a young guest makes a misstep, wiping his oily hands on the couch. A ripple of tut-tutting runs down the table. The matron at his side fixes him with a stare, so icy it could chill the wine. You take the hint, tucking your napkin more securely in your lap, and resolving to be more observant. Music begins to play, a slow, lilting tune on the cithara, setting the tone for the evening. A chorus of laughter rises as a child, dressed in a miniature toga, toddles in with a tray of honey cakes. This, it turns out, is an honoured role in some households. The youngest member presents the first sweets of the night, a symbol of hope for the future, and a signal that feasting can truly begin. You notice how these opening rituals draw everyone together, breaking the ice with shared absurdity. Even the most jaded guest can't help but smile beneath a crown of daisies, or when an over-eager slave accidentally anoints the senator's bald spot. Historians still argue whether these gestures fostered true camaraderie, or were merely a way to distract from the nerves that came with being scrutinized by your peers. Either way, it works. The laughter and music soften the room's edges. But pre-dinner rituals aren't just about fun. For some, they offer a moment of reflection, a chance to give thanks to the household gods, or Lares, whose tiny shrines nestle in corners of the home. A quick prayer is murmured, a pinch of salt, a drop of wine is offered at a small altar. Even in the midst of decadence, Romans rarely forgot to pay respect to the forces they believed governed their fortunes. The final act of the opening ceremonies is the parade of appetizers. Trays laden with tiny eggs, olives, garlicky cheese, and pungent fish sauce are carried in. The host raises his cup and offers a toast to health, luck, and laughter, the perfect prelude to an evening that promises all three if you can make it through the customs with your dignity intact. As you nibble a honey-soaked date, flower crown tilting precariously on your head, you realize that, for Romans, the odd rituals aren't just for show. They're the glue that holds this strange, swirling feast together, ensuring everyone starts on the same page, even if that page is sprinkled with rose petals and olive oil. As the scent of flowers and oil lingers, you start to realize that the real game of a Roman banquet begins long before the first bite. Tonight's guest list isn't just a roll call, it's a chessboard, a delicate balance of friendship, rivalry, and ambition. Being invited, and where you land on the host's scroll, can make or break your reputation for months to come. You clutch your garland, feeling the eyes of fellow guests, and wondering how exactly you made the cut. Mainstream historical fact: Roman banquets were not open house affairs. Invitations were strategic, often handwritten or delivered by a trusted slave with a subtle flourish. To be left out was a grave slight. Ancient writers grumble endlessly about being snubbed, while others boast of invitations from senators, generals, the famously eccentric. But even among the chosen, not all seats were equal. The most honoured guests were assigned places of prestige. The less fortunate were left to make the best of the peanut gallery at the foot of the couch. You sense the social combat from the moment you arrive. The host greets you with a smile that feels just a touch too sharp, glancing behind you to see who else has arrived. You recognize the subtle hierarchy at play. Old friends get a warm embrace, political allies a hearty handshake, and rivals a carefully neutral nod. Some guests arrive with their own entourages, trying to tip the social scales. You hear a merchant boast about the famous lawyer he brought, while a poet claims his latest muse is the secret ingredient for lively conversation. The seating chart is its own minefield. Slaves discreetly shuffle names and cushions, sometimes at the last minute, in response to the shifting alliances and whispered requests. The host's major domo has the air of a general overseeing a battlefield, assigning seats to keep enemies apart, to nudge a favour from a wealthy patron, or to stoke the rivalry between two notorious wits for everyone's amusement. Tonight, you're wedged between a talkative spice trader and a historian who's already started outlining the genealogy of every noble family in the city. Fringe tidbit: some guests, desperate for a better seat, were known to bribe the slaves or slip the host's steward a gift. It's said that a well-placed silver spoon or a rare perfume could work wonders, but as with all things Roman, the risk is as great as the reward. Get caught, and you might find yourself mysteriously uninvited next time. Historians still argue whether these quiet power plays were mostly harmless, or the source of long-standing feuds that played out at dinner after dinner. You watch as the host works the room, dropping sly compliments and inside jokes, his laughter a little too loud, his eyes always calculating. Conversation sparkles as each guest tries to impress. One quotes Virgil, another shares gossip from the Senate, a third spins an outrageous story about a runaway ostrich at a recent games. If you hope to get noticed, you'd better have a witty retort or a story of your own. Otherwise, you risk becoming invisible, just another shadow in the candlelight. Suddenly, a small scandal erupts. A notoriously late senator arrives, breezing past the assembled guests and demanding a better spot. The host's smile freezes as the senator's personal slave tries to rearrange the cushions. For a heartbeat, the room holds its breath. Then, with a practiced wave, the host turns the moment into a joke. Let it never be said that Rome's greatest orator lacks the courage to fight for his dinner. Laughter ripples through the room, and the tension dissolves, but you sense that the seating plan is now even more unstable. Nearby, a pair of sisters whisper about who's missing from tonight's gathering. Was the absent merchant ill, or had he fallen out of favour? The historian leans over and quietly explains that sometimes being left off the list is the host's way of signalling disapproval, or worse, announcing a political break. To be publicly overlooked can do more damage than any snub at the baths. Historians still argue about the motivations behind these invitations. Some suggest they were a genuine way to build community, binding neighbours and allies through shared food and laughter. Others believe banquets were a tool for manipulation, every guest a pawn in a greater game. Ancient letters are full of bitterness and boasts about who was included and who was not, and how fortunes could rise or fall with the simple act of receiving or not receiving a wax-sealed note. The food begins to arrive, but you notice that the conversation is just as much a feast. Every compliment, every joke, every toast is carefully measured. Even the silences say something. A pointed pause, a too quick change of subject, a laugh that dies a little too fast. You realize that tonight's dinner is as much about what isn't said as what is. Fringe detail, some hosts sent out decoy invitations, inviting more people than they could seat, just to see who would turn up and how far they'd go to get in. Others invited rivals only to serve them meagre fare or seat them near the draftiest door. If you feel a chill, don't assume it's the weather. By the time the main course is announced, you're exhausted from keeping up with the verbal fencing. The merchant at your side quietly brags about bribing his way to this couch. The historian tries to draw you into a debate on ancient kings, and you nod, smile, and silently resolve to remember every face just in case the seating chart ever works in your favour. As lamps flicker and laughter echoes, you realize that in Rome, the invitation is only the beginning. The real test is whether you can play the game and leave the table with your dignity and reputation intact. As you settle into your spot, still navigating the shifting currents of status and conversation, the first true test of your culinary courage arrives. The gustatio, or appetizer course. Roman banquets are never simple affairs, and the first foods brought out are proof enough that here, every bite is a performance. The slaves parade in with trays piled high, and the first scent drifting through the air are equal parts tantalizing and mysterious. If you expected a humble salad or some plain bread, well, welcome to the show. Tonight's starters are a carefully curated collection designed to awaken both palate and conversation. There are bowls of marinated olives, glossy and pungent, their salty tang meant to prime your taste buds for the excesses ahead. Next to them, delicate dishes of boiled quail eggs gleam, nestled on beds of herbs and drizzled with a sharp, vinegary sauce. These are the safe options, the culinary handshake before the stranger things begin to appear. Mainstream historical fact. The gustatory was not simply the start of a meal, but a social overture, and Romans took it seriously. Eggs and olives were so common as opening moves that the phrase ab ovo osco ad mala, from egg to apples, came to mean from beginning to end. But the best hosts went further, surprising their guests with edible puzzles. Small birds, pickled fish, and bite-sized cheeses marinated in herbs you can't even name. Suddenly, the servants bring out something more adventurous. Dishes of garum poached tongue, maybe peacock, maybe flamingo, who's to say, and tiny bowls of sea urchin roe, bright orange and shockingly briny. A senator at your side grins, nudging you to try one. You hesitate, then pop the roe in your mouth, bracing for disaster. To your surprise, it's not terrible. Salty, a little sweet, and definitely a conversation starter. Fringe tidbit: one host, famously eccentric, was rumoured to have served stuffed dormouse as an appetizer, fattened on walnuts and honey, then baked and presented in miniature clay pots. Another is said to have delighted in dishes that tricked the senses. What looked like a basket of eggs would actually contain tiny pastries, filled with spiced cheese and honey, meant to confound guests and spark laughter. You watch as a platter of what appears to be roasted figs is revealed, with much fanfare, to be tiny pastry birds stuffed with chopped dates and pepper. You learn quickly that politeness demands at least tasting every dish, no matter how outlandish. The historian on your left waxes poetic about the symbolic meaning of eggs: birth, renewal, good fortune, while the merchant tries to impress by crunching an entire pickled lark, bones and all. There's competition in every gesture. To refuse a dish is to risk seeming ungrateful, or worse, faint of heart. Historians still argue whether these challenge foods were meant to weed out the squeamish or simply to amuse the table, but everyone agrees that an adventurous appetite could earn you friends, or at least a good story. The host, always eager to impress, interrupts to introduce a new delicacy: stuffed sows udder, seasoned with herbs and served cold, a dish rumoured to have been a favourite of the Emperor Vitellius. The matron, 2 places down gamely, samples a bite, declares it unusual, and then slyly slips the rest to her lapdog, who swallows it whole and promptly sneezes, causing an outburst of laughter.
You eye your own portion warily, wondering if anyone will notice if you pass it along under the table. Beneath the table, the slaves watch with hidden smiles, surely betting among themselves on which delicacy will cause the most drama.
They're careful never to let a dish run empty, but quick to remove anything that inspires too much hesitation. Meanwhile, the garlands of flowers and herbs on every head begin to wilt, their scents mingling with that of spiced fish and wine. Another platter appears, livers of geese fattened in darkness, a dish that draws both admiration and a few exaggerated groans. The younger guests try to outdo one another with boasts about what they've eaten in the past. Once, in Capua, I had jellyfish in vinegar. Last Saturnalia, our host served baked mice, truly a marvel of bad taste. The conversation swings from bravado to laughter, with every strange food cementing new alliances and rivalries. You notice that, through all the showmanship, the simplest dishes remain the most beloved. When a bowl of honeyed almonds makes the rounds, conversation hushes for a moment as everyone savours the familiar comfort. For all the spectacle, even Romans appreciate the pleasures of sweetness and crunch. You find yourself grateful for the ordinary, even as you reach for another mysterious tidbit just in case. Historians still debate how much of the oddity was genuine taste and how much was calculated bravado. Ancient letters mock the excess, but they also reveal a kind of pride in surviving a banquet's odder offerings. One poet famously wrote, "He who eats in Rome must swallow his pride," along with a peacock's tongue, as the last trays of appetizers are cleared, and you lean back, heart racing with the thrill of both victory and relief. You realize that in Rome, A banquet is always a test, a playful dare, a performance, and sometimes a shared adventure in courage. The first round of appetizers has only just been cleared when the real fun begins. Not with more food, but with games and amusements designed to crack the ice and loosen the tongues of even the stiffest guest. In the triclinium, laughter is almost as important as olive oil. Tonight, as you scan the faces around the couches, you realize you've landed at a banquet where entertainment is not just encouraged, but practically demanded. A pair of slaves, dressed in outlandish costumes, burst into the room with dice and tiny tokens. They begin to challenge the guests to a quick game of Elir, the Roman ancestor of backgammon. The merchant beside you boasts that he can roll 3 sixes in a row, a claim quickly tested, and judging by the chorus of groans and laughter, just as quickly disproven. The air fills with the clatter of dice on polished wood, the sweet tang of spilled wine, and the ever-present sound of Roman boasts. Mainstream historical fact. Table games were an integral part of Roman banquets, especially as the wine flowed. Games of chance, wordplay, and even mild gambling were commonplace. Many banqueters prided themselves on their skills at ludus duodecim scriptorum, or the art of improvising witty rhymes between courses. Historians still argue whether these amusements were meant to foster unity or simply to expose rivals to a little gentle humiliation, but most agree that a talent for games was almost as prized as a talent for conversation. The laughter is contagious. The poet, emboldened by the first cup of watered wine, leaps to his feet and challenges the table to a round of extemporaneous verse. The rules are simple. The host throws out a subject, let's say the misadventures of a senator's toga, at last year's public baths, and each guest must contribute a line, making the tale ever more ridiculous. You nervously toss in a rhyme about soap made from donkey milk, and the table erupts in giggles. A matron contributes a verse about slippery floors and lost sandals, and soon the poem grows into a chorus, as everyone chimes in with their own twist. Fringe tidbit, some hosts went even further in pursuit of novelty. There are stories of banquets where the opening amusements included performing monkeys, acrobats balancing bowls of figs on their heads, or dwarfs dressed as gods of revelry. One famously eccentric host once hired a troupe to stage a miniature naval battle in a flooded atrium, complete with toy ships and edible sea monsters. Tonight's entertainment is more modest, but no less lively. A group of children, costumed as little cupids, dart between couches, shooting guests with garlands of violets and laughter. The dice games get heated as the night goes on. The senator with the sour expression suddenly cheers as he wins a round, earning a kiss on the cheek from the poet and a crown of parsley as his spoils. Cheating is both expected and celebrated, so long as it's clever and not too obvious. You catch a nobleman palming a die, only to be caught by his own daughter, who shouts his guilt to the room and is rewarded with applause. As the laughter swells, the host signals for the next amusement, a contest of riddles. A slave presents a silver bowl filled with slips of parchment, each bearing a riddle or tongue twister. The first challenge: I speak without a mouth and hear without ears. I have no body, but I come alive with the wind. What am I? The guests ponder, some guessing echo, others offering ever more creative answers, from a toga on a washing line to the senator's hairpiece. The correct answer wins the guest a second helping of honeyed figs, and the wrong answers earn little more than laughter. It's not all jokes, though. The games are a subtle battleground, an opportunity for guests to demonstrate their wit, their nerve, and their capacity for light-hearted defeat. The host keeps a careful eye on the room, rewarding those who join in, and quietly ignoring those who sulk. There is a hierarchy in everything, even laughter. You join a small group playing Banquets, a Roman version of odds and evens, where two people flash fingers and try to guess the sum. The merchant is hopeless, losing every round and providing a running commentary about his rotten luck. The historian, meanwhile, seems to win suspiciously often. Perhaps there's a method to the madness after all. A chorus of music rises from the corner. The lyre is joined by a reed flute, and a girl with a voice like springtime begins to sing an old folk song about love and olives. For a few moments, the games pause, and even the most cynical guest falls silent and It's a reminder that in Rome, entertainment is not just a diversion, but a vital thread in the social tapestry. A way to bond, to spar, and to show one's best self, or at least one's cleverest. Historians still debate whether these amusements genuinely brought people together, or just papered over the cracks of rivalry and ambition. Some ancient authors lament the decline of conversation in favour of spectacle, while others celebrate the joy and noise as proof of a healthy society. Tonight, you simply enjoy the feeling of belonging, a fleeting sense of being at the centre of something both timeless and deliciously odd. As the music fades and the last riddle is guessed, incorrectly, but with much hilarity, you lean back, your head crowned with wilting violets, and think that maybe, just maybe, you've cracked the secret of the Roman banquet. It's not just about the food or the wine, but the company, the game, and the laughter that make the night memorable. You're only a few rounds of dice and riddles into the evening when you notice the real star of any Roman banquet, the wine, or more specifically, the social dance that swirls around it. Wine in Rome isn't just a drink. It's a language, a test of manners, and sometimes a weapon disguised as hospitality. The servers move with a practiced elegance, carrying heavy amphorae in both arms, and you quickly learn that not all wine or all cups are created equal. The ritual begins with the mixing. No self-respecting Roman drinks wine neat. Instead, a large bowl, the crater, is set in the center, and wine is diluted with cool water, sometimes even perfumed with herbs or petals for special occasions. The ratio of wine to water can spark fierce debate. Some guests prefer it strong, others weak, and each claims their way as the only proper method. Mainstream historical fact: the Romans thought drinking undiluted wine was a barbarian habit, reserved for those wild Gauls or the Greeks on a particularly wild night out. Dilution, they insisted, made wine civilized, allowing the party to last for hours and the conversation to stay just this side of coherent. Tonight's host insists on a moderate mix, though you spot a few winks exchanged as the server accidentally makes a batch a little stronger for the younger crowd. The first cup is poured in honor of the gods, with a few drops dribbled onto the floor, a libation, a tiny sacrifice, a nod to the possibility that fortune, like wine, can sour at any moment. As the first round circulates, the toasts begin. The host raises his cup with a flourish, declaring his hope for a night of wit, friendship, and only minor scandal. The company responds in kind, some lifting their cups with a serious prayer for health, others making ribald jokes about the dangers of drinking too deeply. The toasts come fast and loose, and each guest is expected to respond with a clever quip or a poetic couplet. If you freeze up, your neighbour is sure to rescue you, usually with a joke at your expense. Wine games follow close behind. The most popular is conversatio, a sort of competitive toasting where guests match each other cup for cup. To judge tonight, the household's most charming matron decides whose speech is cleverest, whose toast is weakest, and who is simply trying to sneak by with water. Fringe tidbit: at some banquets the judge was chosen by lot, or by spinning a wheel, or even by tossing dice. Their word was law for the night, leading to some truly legendary mischief. As the wine flows, inhibitions drop. The poet launches into a mock heroic ode about the host's questionable fish sauce. The senator, cheeks flushed, tries to outdo him with a limerick about a goat, a lawyer, and the hazards of bad olives. The merchant beside you, who swore he'd stick to small sips, is soon roaring with laughter, barely managing to keep his cup from tipping. Historians still argue whether this stage of the banquet was a blessing or a curse. Some ancient writers praise the commissatio for encouraging equality and spontaneity, allowing guests of all ranks to shine. Others, more cynical, lament the chaos and the way a dignified evening could dissolve into farce. One poet famously complained that the real test of Roman virtue was not in war or peace, but in holding your cup steady when the world spins. Of course, not everyone is a fan of the boisterous games. A few older guests sip their wine delicately, offering wry smiles at the antics, but keeping a careful distance. The historian at your elbow offers a quiet aside. If you value your reputation, leave before the fourth cup. You nod solemnly, but by the time the music swells again, even the most reserved guests are tapping their feet. You notice the etiquette that governs every movement.
Never pour your own wine. That's for slaves or generous friends.
Don't drain your cup in one go, unless you want to provoke laughter, or, worse, be accused of trying to leave early. Always toast the host, and always watch for subtle hints. A refilled cup from the master of the house can be an honour, a warning, or sometimes both.
Fringe tidbit: for the daring, drinking games were a chance to show off. Some guests would propose wild rules. Anyone who mentions the emperor must finish their cup, or the next person to sneeze owes a forfeit. The penalties ranged from singing a song to reciting a racy poem to wearing a wreath of garlic for the rest of the evening.
There's a collective sense of all in good fun, but you sense the underlying social calculus. Who can charm, who can handle their wine, and who will become tomorrow's gossip?
As the night deepens, the mood shifts from playful to unpredictable.
Some guests become more affectionate, others more competitive. The dice are brought out again, this time for drinking forfeits. Laughter spills out into the courtyard, and the moon rises over Rome, catching the golden glint of wine in 100 cups. Historians still debate whether the commissatio was the highlight of Roman feasting, or simply a way to separate the brave from the foolish. What's certain is that here and now, the wine binds the guests together, blurring boundaries, amplifying jokes, and ensuring that tonight's stories will echo long after the lamps are doused. As you set down your cup, feeling the warmth in your cheeks, and the easy camaraderie all around, you realize that in ancient Rome, the true spirit of a banquet isn't in the vintage, but in the delicate, delicious dance between civility and chaos. The laughter softens, then swells again as the wine continues its steady circuit around the couches. And suddenly you're aware that the next act of this Roman performance is about to begin. Food and conversation may be the backbone of the banquet, but live entertainment, the dazzling, the bizarre, the outright ridiculous, provides its soul. Tonight the entertainment is as much a statement of power and taste as the imported wine and peacock tongues, and you find yourself caught up in a spectacle where anything might happen. A hush falls as the first musicians step forward, young men with lyres and flutes, accompanied by a slender girl whose clear voice threads through the room like sunlight. She sings of spring in the Sabine hills, of river gods and lost lovers, her notes rising above the murmur of conversation. For a few moments, even the most jaded senator closes his eyes, lost in the spell. Mainstream historical fact: no proper Roman banquet was complete without music. Musicians, singers, and sometimes poets were hired or enslaved specifically for their ability to charm and distract the company. Some banquets even began with a solemn hymn to the household gods before devolving into more risque performances as the night wore on. Just as you start to relax, the music gives way to a different kind of show. A group of dancers sweeps in, their bodies gleaming with olive oil, swirling in patterns both stately and sensual. Their movements are precise, their costumes sparkling in the lamplight, and for a moment you're mesmerized, until a shout from the host signals the true theme of the evening: surprise. The dancers scatter, and a pair of acrobats launches into a series of somersaults and human pyramids, their feet drawing laughter and gasps from the crowd. Fringe tidbit. Some Roman hosts, never content with ordinary diversions, would go to great lengths to outdo one another. Exotic animals, small monkeys, brightly feathered parrots, even the occasional bear on a leash, could make a sudden appearance, either as part of the act or as living decorations. The most outrageous stories tell of guests startled by a peacock gliding down from the rafters, or a trained pig who could spell out the host's name with pieces of fruit. Tonight, a pair of nimble boys dressed as satyrs prance around the tables, offering guests figs from their baskets and giggling at every joke. You find yourself both charmed and slightly bewildered.
At one point, a troupe of mimes recreates the day's political news with exaggerated gestures and pointed jests. The merchant beside you snorts with laughter at a scene mocking a rival who's not present. A little public humiliation, Roman style. Even the slaves watching from the walls cover their mouths, hiding smiles as they spot their masters parodied by the performers.
The entertainment has another layer too. The host's chance to display power and wealth. The best musicians, the rarest animals, the cleverest jesters, these are marks of status, as tangible as marble fountains or golden goblets. One senator quietly boasts about having imported his flute player from Alexandria. Another murmurs that the last time he dined at this house, the entertainment included a wrestling match between two dwarfs, dressed as Cupid and Mars. Historians still argue whether these spectacles were genuine enjoyment or simply ostentation proof that the host could command both man and beast to perform for his table. As the show continues, the atmosphere shifts from awe to hilarity. A trained dog leaps through hoops, stealing morsels from distracted guests, while a pair of musicians attempts to play dueling melodies on lyre and flute, each faster and more intricate than the last. Laughter bounces off the walls, fueled by wine and the contagious delight of seeing the unexpected. A bowl of dates is passed to the girl with the clear voice, who improvises a silly song about a senator's disastrous haircut, a story that will no doubt resurface in gossip tomorrow. You notice that the entertainment isn't just a diversion, but a safety valve. Tensions, political, social, even romantic, can be softened by a well-timed joke or a mesmerizing performance. A matron, locked in a silent feud with her cousin across the room, dissolves into laughter when a dancer hands her a garland of leeks and crowns her queen of the feast. By the time the acrobats return for an encore, it seems that everyone, even the sullen merchant at your side, has surrendered to the night's cheerful madness. Fringe tidbit: on especially rowdy evenings, the entertainment could spill into chaos. There are stories of surprise animal chases, pie fights, and jesters borrowing a senator's sandals and hiding them in the fig tree. Tonight, the chaos is more gentle, but the spirit is the same. Anything to keep the company laughing, distracted, and ever so slightly off balance. Historians still debate whether these performances brought out the best in Roman society or simply masked its underlying tensions. Some argue that laughter and spectacle held a fractious world together, while others see only a desperate attempt to fill the silence between power plays. Whatever the answer, you know that tonight, for a few golden hours, music and laughter have made strangers into friends, or at least worthy adversaries in tomorrow's gossip. As the last note of music fades and the dancers bow their way out of the triclinium, you lean back with a full heart and a pleasantly dizzy mind. The real oddity of a Roman banquet, you realize, is not the food or even the games, but the endless creativity with which Romans found ways to surprise each other and themselves. As the echoes of music and laughter fade, you notice a new energy building in the room, a subtle anticipation that signals the approach of the prima mensa, the main course. Up to now, you've survived the gauntlet of games, fashion critiques, and appetizers with your dignity mostly intact.
Now it's time for the meal's centerpiece, the kind of culinary excess that has inspired envy, disgust, and open-mouthed wonder for centuries. The first platters arrive in stately procession, borne by a fleet of slaves whose arms must ache from the weight. At a glance, some dishes seem comfortingly familiar. There are great round loaves of warm bread, wheels of creamy cheese, and bowls piled high with glossy ripe fruit, figs, grapes, and pomegranates glistening in the lamplight.
Roasted meats, their skin crackling, fill the air with a promise of satisfaction. You reach for a slice of honeyed ham, and for a brief, blissful moment, you almost forget you're reclining on a couch, halfway through your fourth cup of watered wine. Mainstream historical fact. While Roman banquets are famous for their oddities, much of the food was robust and recognizable. Grain stews, roast meats, vegetables in oil, and sweet. For many guests, these normal dishes were a welcome anchor amid the flood of extravagance. But the host, determined to be remembered, always has a few tricks left to play. Soon enough, the mood shifts from comfort to curiosity. A servant places a gleaming silver platter in the center of the table. Whispers ripple as you realize you're staring at a row of delicately arranged peacock tongues, glazed, spiced, and artfully fanned out, as if the bird had simply decided to take a nap on a bed of parsley. Someone near you snorts. All that beauty for such a tiny bite. Another guest, braver or perhaps more boastful, declares the tongues surprisingly tender, but not worth plucking a peacock for. Next, another favourite oddity, roasted dormice, fattened on chestnuts and honey, arrive nestled in little clay pots. The more adventurous among you pop one whole in your mouth, crunchy, sweet, and not at all like chicken. A matron jokes, for the faint of heart, there's always the option to pretend you've already eaten too much bread, or to slyly offer your portion to a neighbour with a knowing wink. Fringe tidbit, occasionally, a particularly ambitious host might serve dishes of jellyfish, sea urchin, or even flamingo, cooked with rare spices and citrus brought from across the empire. Historians still argue whether these extreme foods were genuinely enjoyed, or merely used as a spectacle to prove a host's wealth and connections. There are even tales of certain emperors who competed to see who could serve the strangest menu. One infamous feast included ostrich brains, boiled tree fungus, and fish that glowed in the dark. Tonight, the chef's pride is a wild boar stuffed with sausages and apples, roasted so slowly that the meat falls apart at a touch. The merchant beside you sighs with relief and goes in for seconds, careful to avoid the glistening eyes of a nearby platter of boiled goat feet. Someone at the far end of the table asks for something light, and is promptly handed a steaming bowl of lentil stew, thick with garlic, onions, and enough pepper to wake the dead. Despite all the culinary theatre, you notice that conversation and laughter never really stop. The senator launches into a tale about the time he accidentally mistook a tray of fried larks for pastries at a consul's feast. The poet waxes rhapsodic about the virtues of fish sauce garum, ever present and ever divisive. There's a running joke about the dangers of eating anything you can't identify by smell or shape, and you find yourself quietly agreeing. Yet not everything is a test of bravery. You discover a bowl of creamy goat cheese sweetened with honey, so delicious you forget to listen for gossip for a moment. Fresh figs burst with flavour, bread sops up rivers of olive oil, and a humble carrot salad dressed with vinegar and herbs proves a crowd favourite, even among the peacock enthusiasts. Fringe tidbit, some hosts, perhaps tired of the endless parade of oddities, would sneak fake dishes onto the table. Boiled eggs dyed blue with flowers, cakes shaped like roasted quail, or pies that, when cut, released a flock of live birds. These edible jokes could elicit roars of laughter, or the occasional shriek, especially from unsuspecting new guests. Historians still argue about the health risks and culinary ambitions of such feasts. Some believe the endless parade of rare foods, led to more food poisoning than flavor discoveries, while others marvel at the creativity and resourcefulness of Roman cooks. There are debates about whether the most extreme menus were real or exaggerated by poets with axes to grind, and plenty of evidence to suggest a bit of both. As the main course winds down, you recline a little deeper, a bit dazed from the flavors, the stories, and the relentless sense that, here in Rome, nothing is ever as straightforward as it seems. You pick at the remains of a fig, sip the last of your wine, and smile to yourself grateful for the bread, the cheese, and the knowledge that, in the end, even the oddest Roman banquet still makes room for a taste of the familiar. The meal seems to settle for a moment, guests murmuring their approval or mock horror at what's already been served, but you soon realize that, in the world of Roman banquets, the real show is just getting started. With the first round of main dishes cleared, the table is transformed into a stage for what can only be described as the banquet's sideshow foods, the outrageous, the experimental, and the downright theatrical. A servant with a flourish brings forth a covered dish, and the air is thick with anticipation. When the lid is lifted, you're greeted by a dazzling display, tiny songbirds roasted whole, their beaks propped open with slivers of date, and their feathers replaced by a dusting of gold leaf. There's a collective gasp followed by a burst of laughter as one guest makes the obligatory joke about eating like a bird. Mainstream historical fact: Romans loved spectacle at the table. Whether it was a matter of showing off wealth, entertaining guests, or both, elaborate and often odd dishes were hallmarks of prestigious banquets. Some of these delicacies, like the famed peacock tongues and dormouse, were intended more to impress than to feed. Tonight, the highlight is a dish called gustum de preg acquis, a concoction involving apricots stuffed with peppered nuts and tiny salted fish, arranged on a platter of polished shell. The flavors are a wild clash, sweet, salty, sharp, and entirely unlike anything you'd expect. The poet on your left declares it a dish for philosophers and madmen alike. You take a bite, unsure whether you're impressed or confused, but you find yourself smiling anyway. That perhaps is the point. Fringe tidbit: some hosts staged food tricks for amusement. A pie might arrive looking innocent enough, but when cut would release a flock of small birds or even live frogs, a trick that never failed to make the children and many adults shriek in delight. At particularly extravagant feasts, jelly moulded into the shapes of gods or mythological monsters would wobble across the table, shimmering in the candlelight, more admired than eaten. A favourite prank was to fill eggshells with custard, so that the unsuspecting guest who cracked one expecting a boiled egg was met with an explosion of sweet cream. Not everyone partakes in every dish. Some guests, perhaps scarred by previous experiences, pick cautiously at their bread, keeping a safe distance from anything that glistens or jiggles. You notice that the slaves are adept at judging who's feeling brave and who'd rather stick to olives. Platters veer toward the more adventurous guests, who compete for the honour or the notoriety of trying the weirdest item on offer. At the far end of the table, a challenge is issued. Who among the company will sample the garum surprise, a custard topped with a drizzle of the pungent fish sauce that divides Romans like no other ingredient? The merchant volunteers, milking the moment for all it's worth, and manages a heroic swallow. He makes a face, shudders dramatically, and then winks to the crowd. Better than last year's pig's udder, he declares, drawing a round of applause and several sighs of relief. Historians still argue whether these stunts were a genuine part of daily life, or exaggerated by writers hungry for a good story. Some believe only the wealthiest could afford such excess, while others note that even modest banquets might feature a single show dish just to keep up appearances. Letters and satirical poems from the era suggest that the boundary between sincerity and spectacle was, as always, delightfully blurry. You catch snippets of conversation all around. One senator reminisces about a dinner where the dessert was an enormous honey cake, stuffed with live bees, released only after the first slice was cut. A matron tells of a neighbour who trained her dog to fetch platters of sweetmeats from the kitchen, sometimes swapping them for tidbits meant for the guests. The air is full of boasting and laughter, as each guest tries to outdo the last with tales of the strangest dish ever served. Tonight, the ultimate party trick is revealed, just before the final course. A plate of miracle grapes. Ordinary grapes, carefully peeled and then dipped in spiced wine, reskinned with candied citrus peel, to appear more exotic. The result is surprising, sweet, and oddly familiar. The host raises his cup and offers a toast to ingenuity, bravery, and strong stomachs. The room erupts in cheers, and you can't help but join in, feeling both triumphant and a little wary of what the next round might bring.
Orange tidbit. At some banquets, the lines between entertainment and gluttony blurred even further. Guests might compete to see who could eat the most oysters or who could swallow the oddest food without flinching. Prizes were sometimes awarded, though the real reward was the story you could tell afterward, and the notoriety you gained or suffered among your peers.
As the platters are cleared and the laughter quiets, you recline with a mix of relief and satisfaction. In the world of the Roman banquet, food is rarely just food. It's a challenge, a spectacle, and sometimes a test of nerves as much as palate. You've survived the sideshow, and as the musicians return for another round, you realize that, in Rome, every dinner is also a story, a memory to savor, retell, and if you're clever, embellish for years to come. You hardly have time to recover from the latest food spectacle before a new test arrives, one with no clear rules, plenty of hidden traps, and lasting consequences for anyone who slips up. The unwritten laws of Roman table manners. Here, etiquette is as elaborate as any mosaic, and just as likely to trip you if you're not careful. It's not only what you eat, but how you eat, recline, speak, and even burp that will determine whether you leave the banquet with your honor and your future invitations intact. First, there's the reclining itself. The Romans consider sitting upright at dinner the mark of a child or a barbarian. Instead, you lie stretched on your left side, propped on your elbow, which leaves your right hand free for serving yourself from communal platters. The couches are close, so if you're not careful, you'll end up elbowing your neighbor in the ribs, or worse, in the face. The merchant to your right apologizes with a grin as he accidentally jabs you, then expertly shifts, so your toes nearly touch. Mainstream historical fact: reclining to eat was a symbol of status and civilization, reserved for the freeborn and privileged. Only slaves and children sat or stood during the meal. The closer you recline to the host, the higher your social rank, or at least the more favor you'd curried this week. The act of eating itself is a social dance. You're expected to take small portions, never piling your plate or hoarding the choicest bit. If you dare to double dip your bread in the communal sauce, eyes will narrow across the table. At the same time, leaving too much uneaten might be interpreted as an insult to the cook, or worse, the host's judgment in menu selection. It's a balancing act, and everyone is watching discreetly, but always watching. Then come the stranger rules. Burping after a particularly good course. Entirely acceptable, provided it's not too loud or too soon. Romans believe it's a compliment to the chef, a sign of hearty enjoyment. Spitting out a bone, on the other hand, requires finesse. The proper method is to discreetly drop it into your napkin. Or, failing that, let a slave hold a special dish beneath your mouth. A detail that feels just a little too personal for comfort. Fringe tidbit: some guests, eager to stand out, become infamous for their table antics. Ancient letters and satirical poems recount tales of diners who juggled olives, tossed crusts at rivals, or tried to burp a tune to the delight or horror of the company. There's a popular story about a nobleman who, bored by the conversation, began reciting epic poetry between bites of eel, only to be drowned out by the sound of a rival spitting plum pits into a silver cup. Conversation, too, is an art. You're expected to contribute witty remarks, flattering comments, and the occasional well-timed joke. But tread carefully. Too much sarcasm, and you risk offending the wrong senator. Too little, and you fade into the background, forgotten before dessert. Tonight, the host encourages a round of wordplay about the emperor's latest military campaign, drawing out both bravado and subtle digs from his guests. You chime in with a clever remark about Roman roads and get a nod of approval from the historian, while the matron across from you eyes you with new respect.
Historians still argue whether these strict codes of conduct fostered camaraderie or simply made everyone anxious. Some believe the rules provided structure, keeping tempers in check and feasts from descending into chaos.
Others note that the pressure to perform socially, verbally, gastronomically, must have left many guests longing for a simpler meal among friends. There are stories of famous banquets that ended in brawls or tears because someone flouted the rules, whether by accident or design. Meanwhile, the slaves play their own role in the dance. Their movements are precise and nearly invisible, clearing plates before you notice, refilling cups, and whisking away any sign of mess. A particularly attentive server catches a wine spill before it stains your toga and earns a murmured bravo from the poet at your side. The best households train their staff not just in service, but in the nuances of guest moods and rivalries, knowing that a well-timed refill or a quiet word can prevent disaster. There are moments of comic relief too. The merchant at your side tries to balance an olive on his nose, drawing cheers from the younger crowd and a scandalized glare from a stern-faced matron. Someone, emboldened by the wine, attempts to start a singing competition, only to be gently but firmly hushed by the host who insists on finishing the main course before any more distractions. Laughter ebbs and flows, sometimes wild, sometimes nervous, but always ready to erupt at the smallest provocation.
Fringe tidbit. In some circles it became fashionable to invent new rules mid-banquet just to see who would catch on. One notorious host would declare that dessert could only be eaten with the left hand, or that each toast must include a joke about Saturn.
Those who failed to comply were subjected to mild forfeit, wearing a laurel crown made of leeks, or reciting a tongue twister before the next course. As the meal winds down and the final platters are cleared, you recline back, a little wiser and more wary. The lamplight glows softer, the laughter lingers, and you marvel at how something as simple as eating bread and cheese can become an epic adventure in etiquette. You find yourself quietly grateful for the structure, even as you suspect that tomorrow the gossip will swirl as much about who broke which rule as who brought the best story. Historians still debate whether Roman table manners were an exercise in community or competition, order or anxiety. But tonight, for a few golden hours, you've played the game, survived the pitfalls, and maybe, just maybe, earned yourself a place at the next feast. The laughter over table games and etiquette isn't even cold before you realize the silent engine of this entire spectacle, the invisible army of slaves making it all happen. Every bite you take, every drop of wine in your cup, and every flicker of lamp oil is orchestrated by dozens of hands that never get to recline, toast, or take center stage. It's both awe-inspiring and, if you're honest, a little uncomfortable. Once you notice, all evening slaves move quietly through the triclinium, some bearing trays of food, others kneeling to wipe a spill or fan away smoke from the lamps. They appear ghost-like just when needed, vanishing again before their faces are ever really seen. In the kitchen, the clatter is relentless. Cooks chopping, roasting, basting, and shouting orders in a language all their own. Mainstream historical fact: Roman banquets, especially among the wealthy, depended utterly on slave labor. Cooks, servers, musicians, dishwashers, carvers, wine pourers, jesters, and even the personal dressers you met earlier, all enslaved. The grander the banquet, the larger the army, and the more invisible their work. You catch glimpses of the kitchen, a flash of fire as a spit is turned, the sharp smell of vinegar and herbs, and a boy barely older than 10 scrubbing platters, almost his own size. In the corridor, a young girl runs with an amphora of wine nearly as tall as she is, her face set with the focus of someone who knows that a single spill could mean a beating later.
There's a quiet, almost military choreography here. The servers have mastered the invisible route, weaving between couches, never crossing in front of a senator, and always knowing which guest wants a refill and which should be left alone.
Fringe tidbit, some especially rich or eccentric hosts trained their slaves as musicians, actors, or comedians, and the best could fetch fortunes at auction. One notorious noblewoman was rumoured to have a staff of 100, each skilled in a different form of entertainment, from harp-playing twins to a mute who could communicate entire plays through gesture alone. In some circles, it was fashionable to show off your household's talents, inviting guests to challenge the staff in poetry, dance, or even riddles. Still, the work is grueling, and the rewards for the slaves themselves slim to none. In some houses, the best cooks might gain a reputation, even the chance to buy their freedom with tips and gifts. But for most, a banquet is just another night of relentless labour, one with the added pressure of watchful eyes and unpredictable masters. You notice, too, how the presence and absence of slaves signal shifts in status among the guests. The most favoured are assigned personal attendants, boys who stand ready to fetch, pour, or fan as needed. Others must make do with the public servers, quick but impersonal. Historians still argue whether these hierarchies among slaves mirrored the rivalries among the freeborn, or simply added another layer to the endless Roman obsession with rank. A sudden commotion snaps you out of your thoughts. A plate slips, shattering on the mosaic floor. For a heartbeat, the room freezes. The slave who dropped it pales, the laughter fading to tense silence. The host, seeing the glances from every couch, raises a hand and laughs, a performance meant to restore calm. Let it be an omen for broken boredom, he declares, and everyone chuckles, but you sense the tension lingering as the slave bows and disappears, no doubt dreading the kitchen's wrath more than the guests' attention. A few guests use their attendants to show off, requesting elaborate folded napkins, complicated cocktails, or snippets of gossip from the servants' quarters. Others quietly slip food to the youngest or look away when a tired server nods off in a corner. There's compassion here and calculation, both coexisting beneath the surface. After all, every guest knows that today's server may be tomorrow's story. Servants have ears, and in Rome, information is sometimes the most valuable dish at the table. Fringe tidbit: in the back rooms, slaves sometimes held their own banquets, with leftovers, quiet affairs filled with whispered jokes about their masters. A clever cook might carve a little extra from a roast, a favourite cupbearer might sneak a sip of the rarest wine, and for one brief hour, the hierarchy of the triclinium is inverted, if only in their imaginations. Historians still debate the real lives and hopes of these invisible hosts. Some ancient writers offer rare glimpses of slaves gaining freedom, even wealth, after years of service. Others paint a grimmer picture, emphasizing the strict punishments and endless toil. One thing is certain: behind every glittering Roman banquet lies a mountain of unseen, unheard labor, shaping not just the meal, but the very fabric of Roman society. As the main course winds down, and the chatter resumes, you can't help but look with new eyes at the flurry of silent feet and skilled hands that keep the feast flowing. Tomorrow, all the stories will focus on the guests, the food, and the entertainment, But for tonight, you take a quiet moment to thank the ones who made it possible, even if no one else ever does. As the last traces of the main course are whisked away, and guests recline a little heavier, a murmur ripples down the couches. Someone inevitably brings up the most infamous rumour of all, the vomitorium. You brace yourself for the wave of jokes and knowing smirks, because even centuries later, the myth refuses to die. But tonight, here in the heart of a real Roman banquet, you finally get to experience the truth, rather than the legend. It begins innocently enough. The merchant beside you, eyeing his 6th helping of wild boar and his 3rd goblet of wine, leans in and whispers, "So, where's the vomitorium? I hear Romans built special rooms just for, well, you know?" Across the table, the poet rolls his eyes and launches into a dramatic explanation, his voice dripping with mock gravitas. Indeed, the great mystery of Rome, secret halls of glorious regurgitation, where senators make room for dessert with a flick of the wrist. The whole table bursts into laughter, and the host lifts his cup in mock salute. Mainstream historical fact, here's the reality check. There was no such thing as a vomitorium in the sense of a dedicated puke room for overstuffed diners. The word vomitorium referred in Roman architecture to passageways in theatres or stadiums designed to let crowds spew forth efficiently at the end of a show. The image of Romans feasting and then heading off to conveniently vomit is a much later myth, probably invented by scandalized Victorians. Historians still argue whether any wealthy Romans actually excused themselves mid-banquet to make space for more, but there's no evidence they built rooms for it. That doesn't mean indulgence and its consequences didn't happen. The reality is messier, and maybe even more interesting. Banquets were, by design, exercises in excess. Some guests might excuse themselves to a private corner or a garden if they felt overwhelmed. A few especially enthusiastic feasters, or those desperate to impress, might even force a little room for dessert. But this was hardly the organized ritual the myths suggest. For most, pacing and bravado were all part of the game.
Fringe tidbit. Satirical poets and playwrights loved poking fun at overeager banqueters. You might hear stories, true or not, about senators who tried to out-eat gladiators, or matrons whose pride in their robust constitution led to some unfortunate public spectacles.
There's an oft-repeated tale about a certain Lucius who, after 3 helpings of stuffed dormouse, excused himself for fresh air and returned with a suspiciously lighter step and a renewed appetite. As the jokes fly, the poet at your table recites a verse. "Better out than in," the wise man cries, but woe to the guest with watered eyes. If your toga's stained with yesterday's bread, pray you'll be remembered for your wit instead. Even the slaves, trained to hide every reaction, smirk at the punchline. The host, seizing the moment, orders a round of strong-scented oils and chilled water to be brought in. Each guest is offered a damp cloth and a dab of oil for their temples, meant to refresh the senses and clear the palate. You inhale deeply, relieved by the crisp tang of mint and lemon. This is the real Roman version of a reset. A pause, a chance to recover, before sweets, cheese, and even more wine begin their parade. Someone dares another joke about hidden relief stations behind the garden hedge. The matron, with the dry wit, leans forward. "In my house, anyone who cannot handle his supper is sent to bed with the dogs. It teaches discipline and saves on linen." Laughter follows, a little louder now, as the edge of tension softens, and the night slides into its second wind. Historians still debate whether Roman excess has been exaggerated or understated by both ancient sources and modern imaginations. Some writers described feasts that lasted all night, with guests barely able to walk home. Others noted that the finest hosts prided themselves on moderation and a smooth, dignified flow. It's likely the truth sat somewhere in the middle, a blend of bravado, indulgence, social competition, and plenty of private regrets. For you, the reality is both less scandalous and more relatable than the legend. The excess is real, but the main ingredient is theatre, not plumbing. Most guests are far more concerned with maintaining their dignity, their reputation, and their place at next week's feast than with making room by unsavoury means. As the oil and water work their magic, you look around and see the faces of contented guests, some red-cheeked, some glassy-eyed, all united by the shared absurdity of the night. No vomitorium required, just a little space, a little laughter, and, if needed, a quiet stroll in the garden to contemplate the meaning of restraint. With the legend debunked, the mood restored, you recline deeper into your cushion, ready for the sweets and surprises still to come. You survived the myth, the meal, and, most importantly, you kept your dignity intact. More than can be said for the poor souls forever trapped in the imaginations.
As the evening drifts on, and the afterglow of laughter from the vomitorium jokes fades, the banquet takes a turn that is both familiar and utterly Roman. The ritual of toasts, libations, and drinking games. No one at the table seems surprised when the host calls for more wine, but you quickly realize this is not just a casual top-up.
Here, raising your cup is a performance all its own, layered with meaning, tradition, and just enough risk to keep even the most seasoned banqueter on their toes. The host rises slightly, reclines more dramatically, and lifts his goblet.
All conversation hushes as he delivers the evening's first formal toast, invoking Jupiter and Bacchus for luck, laughter, and the kind of mischief that's easy to forgive by sunrise.
To the gods who made wine, and the friends who make it worth drinking, he declares glasses clink in a chaotic chorus, and you sense everyone, from the senators to the slaves waiting in the shadows, exhale together.
Mainstream historical fact. Toasts were a vital part of Roman banqueting, often delivered with as much care as a lawyer's argument or a poet's recitation. The libation, pouring out a small measure of wine to the gods, was both superstition and social glue, binding guests together and inviting fortune to smile on the rest of the night. Historians still argue whether these moments were truly sacred or just an excuse for a longer party. But ancient sources are full of stories where fortunes, friendships, and feuds were made or broken by a clever or disastrous toast.
You're invited to offer a toast, and the pressure is palpable. Some guests stand on ceremony, quoting Virgil or Horace, while others opt for wit. May the wine be old and the quarrels be new. One guest quips, drawing applause. Your own toast is simple, wishing for empty plates, full cups, and stories no one's ashamed to retell, and is met with approving nods, if not outright cheers. Then come the drinking games. The host introduces symposia rules, borrowed from the Greeks, drinking by the measure, matching your neighbour cup for cup, or shooting the cotobus, a challenge to flick the dregs of your wine at a target with as much flourish as possible. The laughter grows, especially when the senator, with the best toga, utterly misses and stains the mosaic floor, to the delight of the assembled company. Fringe tidbit. One popular Roman drinking game involved dropping a ring or coin into a large goblet and challenging guests to retrieve it with their lips, hands free. The losers might be tasked with reciting a naughty poem, telling a secret, or wearing a wreath of onion leaves for the rest of the evening. At particularly rowdy feasts, the games took on a life of their own, with forfeits that grew increasingly inventive. One letter from a scandalized aunt tells of a banquet where losers had to imitate farm animals for the amusement of the table. But even as the games get sillier, etiquette lingers. You notice that toasting with the wrong group, especially with those of much higher or lower status, can bring raised eyebrows or worse, cool silence. The social stratification never entirely vanishes, even as the wine blurs other boundaries. The host subtly keeps the peace, guiding the order of toasts so that each clique gets its moment, but never disrupt the carefully managed flow of the feast. As the rounds continue, the air thickens with song. A pair of musicians strikes up a tune, and spontaneous singing breaks out, some guests crooning classics, others inventing lyrics about the evening's adventures. The poet at your elbow improvises a verse praising the cook's courage in serving dormouse, while a matron composes a couplet about the senator's tragic toga.
It's a moment of joyful unity, with even the more stoic guests eventually swaying to the rhythm. Cups aloft.
Historians still debate the deeper meaning of these communal rituals. Some insist the toasts and drinking games were a genuine bond, a rare chance for social equals to let down their guard. Others point to the competitive spirit, suggesting that every toast was also a test of wit and stamina, a chance to elevate or embarrass. There are stories of banquets that ended in tears, or brawls after a poorly chosen libation, and others that cemented lifelong alliances with a single clever speech. Tonight, the balance feels just right: enough camaraderie to make the wine sweeter, enough rivalry to keep everyone sharp. You're drawn into a quick-fire round of riddles, with the loser promising to serenade the room badly at dessert. As the contest ends, you watch as cups are refilled and another round of toasts begins, this time to the kitchen staff, the musicians, and even the ever-dutiful slaves. Fringe tidbit: in some households the host would signal the end of the drinking games by dousing the hearth or offering a final toast to silence and sleep. Those who lingered were gently, or not so gently, reminded that even Bacchus knows when it's time to call it a night. As you recline, head a little lighter, you savour the warmth of the wine, the music, and the company. The toasts and games have done their work, melting barriers and weaving everyone, guest and host, senator and poet, into a single happy tapestry. For tonight, at least everyone belongs, united by laughter, a little mischief, and the knowledge that in Rome even the simplest cup of wine can change your fate. The evening's warmth grows heady with wine, jokes, and the constant clinking of cups. But as the banqueters relax into the cushions, a new contest emerges. Not of appetite or agility, but of wit. In Rome, the tongue can be as sharp as a senator's dagger. After a few rounds of toasts, it's open season for insults, satire, and verbal duels that leave their own kind of scars. You find yourself both entertained and a little anxious, knowing that anyone could become tonight's target, or, with luck, its champion. A hush falls as the host signals the start of the battle of words. It's an ancient tradition, borrowed from both the Greeks and Rome's own rowdier forebears. Each guest, armed with clever remarks and half-true stories, takes their turn skewering a rival with a well-placed barb or a poetic turn of phrase. Mainstream historical fact: Roman banquets, especially among the elite, were hotbeds of satire and one-upmanship. Guests prided themselves on their ability to deliver a clever insult wrapped in elegant language. These games of wit were sometimes as memorable and as consequential as any political debate. The first volley comes from the poet, who eyes the merchant's purple-dyed toga and quips, "Did you borrow your hue from a wine stain or a sunset over the fish market?" Laughter erupts, and the merchant, well aware of the rules, fires back, "At least my toga's colour doesn't run at the first sign of rain. Unlike some people's courage." The table applauds, the score even. Tonight, the host has set a theme: the perils of Roman excess. Every barb, every couplet must fit the motif. The historian delivers a biting couplet about a senator who eats like a lion, but roars like a mouse. The senator, quick on the uptake, retorts that the historian's words are like yesterday's olives, hard to swallow, impossible to forget. There's an edge beneath the laughter. These are not just jokes, but tests of reputation. Fringe tidbit: some banquets took these contests so seriously that prizes were awarded: silver cups, rare fruit, or more often, a laurel wreath made of parsley or leeks. Ancient writers mention feasts where the poet laureate was expected to compose on the spot, turning even the night's mishaps into biting verse. One hostess became famous for awarding a slipper to the most foot-in-mouth comment, a prize coveted for its notoriety. As the jests fly, you watch the subtle rules of the game. A barb must never draw blood, only laughter. The insulted party is expected to respond in kind, never in anger. On rare occasions, when a joke goes too far, the host smoothly changes the subject, perhaps by inviting a musician to play or calling for another round of dessert. Still, you sense the undercurrent, alliances being tested, old grievances reignited, all beneath a veneer of fun. You are drawn in when the poet aims a playful couplet your way, teasing you for reclining so low your dreams are sure to arrive before dessert. The table turns to you expectantly, heart pounding. You shoot back, better to dream on a low couch than snore on a high one. The laughter is approving, and the poet raises his cup to you in mock defeat. Historians still argue whether these battles of wit strengthened social bonds or simply masked deeper tensions. Some suggest they served as a safe outlet for rivalries that might otherwise explode in more dangerous ways. Others note that the power to insult and be insulted was itself a privilege, a sign of belonging among the in-crowd. There are tales of banquets where an especially stinging remark led to duels, exile, or, more commonly, a week of frosty silence. The host, ever the conductor, keeps the contest lively but light. A matron delivers a poem mocking the mysterious disappearance of the senator's hairline, and even the senator can't help but chuckle as he pats his shining dome. The musicians chime in, plucking out musical roasts, and soon the room is a swirl of clever repartee, song and applause. Fringe tidbit: for those less verbally gifted, backup plans abound. Some guests come prepared with pre-written quips, or collaborate with their slaves to pass them notes beneath the table. There are stories of clever slaves saving their masters from embarrassment by whispering a witty comeback just in time. A well-timed joke from a servant could even earn a laugh for the master, and sometimes a discreet silver coin. As dessert is announced, the tone softens. The host signals the end of formal insults with a toast to friends who spar as well as they feast. There's genuine relief as guests lean back, rubbing aching bellies and sore cheeks from so much laughter. Historians still debate whether these verbal jousts were vital for Rome's social fabric, or just another arena for showing off. Tonight, as you savour a bite of honey cake and enjoy the softening mood, you're just grateful you survived the contest with your reputation and your sense of humour intact. By now, the sky outside has faded to a velvet black, the moon climbing above the tiled rooftops, while the lamps burn low in the triclinium. But inside, the energy of the banquet does not dim. In fact, it changes colour entirely. After the formalities and the structured courses, the feast melts into late-night revels. Here the boundaries between propriety and absurdity are softer than a Roman pillow, and anything seems possible. The air is thick with possibility, the last and oddest games, secrets whispered in corners, and the sense that you might wake up tomorrow, half convinced it was all a dream. The desserts arrive first, an enticing riot of colour and sweetness. Platters of honey cakes, dried figs, almond pastries, and clusters of candied fruit are passed from hand to hand. Someone produces a bowl of snow hauled down from distant mountains and packed in straw, then smothers it in syrup, mint and rosewater. The youngest guests shriek with delight, and even the sternest senator abandons himself to the pleasure of sugar melting on his tongue. Mainstream historical fact: Romans adored their sweets, and the end of a banquet was often crowned with elaborate confections, many flavoured with honey, wine, nuts and spices. The more creative the dessert, the more likely it was to become a conversation piece for weeks. As the last morsels vanish, the games shift into a new mode. The household musicians trade their lyres for tambourines and begin a round of raucous songs encouraging guests to clap, sing, and, if courage allows, dance. Someone starts a circle dance, arms linked, and feet stumbling in surprisingly coordinated chaos. One matron, emboldened by too much wine, invents a new step that everyone gamely copies, leading to laughter and a few near collisions with the dessert table. Fringe tidbit. Some banquets became famous for their wild after-dinner pranks. It wasn't uncommon for guests to sneak garlands onto sleeping revelers, swap togas while the owner's back was turned, or hide pickled eggs in the sandals of their rivals. There are stories of parties where the furniture was rearranged so thoroughly that even the host awoke the next morning confused about whose house it was. Tonight, the host announces a contest of imitation. Each guest must impersonate another, with the best mimic winning a laurel crown made of parsley, naturally, and the right to command a song. The historian is first, standing and delivering a hilarious impression of the merchant's long-winded business stories. The merchant counters with an exaggerated take on the senator's hand-waving oratory, reducing the room to tears of laughter. You're called upon next, and you channel the poet's habit of dramatic sighs and skyward glances, eliciting a round of applause and a friendly slap on the back. As the hours stretch, the games take on an increasingly mischievous tone. Someone starts a game of Pass the Mystery Parcel, a cloth bundle hiding small objects, and challenges. If you unwrap a walnut, you must share an embarrassing story. If you find a ribbon, you must perform a dance. The matron ends up having to recite a love poem to the cook, who blushes and bows. The senator, unlucky as ever, must balance a honey cake on his nose, while walking the length of the triclinium, which he does with surprising dignity. Historians still argue whether these after-dinner revels were an essential part of Roman banquets, or an indulgence reserved for the most decadent households. Some suggest that the wildness helped dissolve old grudges and build new friendships. Others say it was an invitation for disaster, leading to broken crockery, bruised egos, and the occasional sleepless night for the slaves tasked with cleaning up the mess. You notice that, in this looser, lighter hour, the differences in rank and status seem to fade. The poet and the senator share a cup. The merchant flirts shamelessly with the matron, and even the host's slaves relax now that the most dangerous duties are past. Join in the singing from the shadows. A kitchen boy strums a stolen lyre, and his off-key song inspires a round of clapping so thunderous that the host rewards him with a leftover sweet. Fringe tidbit. At the most legendary banquets, some guests would simply refuse to go home. They'd curl up where they lay, sleeping off the excess beneath the couches or in corners. The host, if generous, would provide extra cushions and a cup of watered wine for the morning after. There's a rumour that one poet, too poor to afford a home, attended banquets every night for a month, living solely on leftovers and the kindness of Rome's insomniac elite. As the triclinium begins to empty, and the first hints of dawn glow behind the shutters, you realize the real secret of the Roman banquet. The end is never quite the end. The last joke, the final song, the gentle snoring from a guest who has given up on dignity, they're all part of a story that will be told again and again, growing more absurd and more wonderful with every retelling. You recline deeper into your couch, sugar and laughter on your lips, already hoping that your next invitation will come soon, and that you'll remember at least half of what happened when you wake. The wild energy of midnight lingers, but there's a sudden shift as the host calls for quiet. The musicians lower their instruments, and the laughter softens into a reverent hush. Tonight's revels aren't quite finished. A final tradition remains, one that feels both sacred and a little bit absurd. the banquet for the gods. You watch as servants bring in small altars and platters heaped with symbolic offerings, and a hush falls over the room as even the most mischievous guest straightens their garland and wipes honey from their chin. Mainstream historical fact. In ancient Rome, dining was not only a social event but also a spiritual one. Feasts often began or ended with rituals dedicated to the household gods, the Lars and Penates, or in grander homes to Jupiter, Bacchus, or whichever deity the host favoured that night. A portion of food and drink was offered up in thanks or petition, and sometimes guests joined in with prayers, libations, or even miniature sacrifices, usually of cakes, fruit, or wine. Tonight, the host stands and pours the first libation, the few drops of wine, splashed dramatically onto the mosaic floor. To the gods of this house, may they forgive our foolishness and spare our heads in the morning, he intones, half serious, half with a wink. Guests follow suit, each offering a crumb of honey cake, a curl of roasted pork, or a candied fig to the little altar. For a moment, the triclinium feels transformed. Flickering lamplight catches on polished marble, the scent of incense rises, and the ordinary dissolves into the mythic. Fringe tidbit: some eccentric Romans were known to take these rituals to extremes. One famously superstitious senator commissioned a gold-plated altar on wheels, rolling it out for every banquet and insisting his guests recite odes to Venus before dessert. Another family was rumoured to invite a costumed actor to impersonate Bacchus, distributing grapes and encouraging wild songs, sometimes resulting in chaos, sometimes just in more spilled wine. The prayers are simple but heartfelt: gratitude for health and family, hopes for fortune in the year ahead, the classic plea that tomorrow's hangover be gentle. The merchant whispers an extra offering for success in trade. The poet, a wish for inspiration. You silently thank the gods that you survived the peacock tongues, the dormouse pies, and the never-ending riddles. Historians still argue whether these pious interludes were sincerely felt, or just one more theatrical element of the banquet, meant to impress the guests and curry favour with fortune. The mood softens even further as a chorus of young voices rises in a hymn. The host's children, costumed in white tunics, lead a song to Vesta, guardian of the hearth. The older guests hum along, and even the slaves, standing quietly in the shadows, join in. There's a sense of unity, a reminder that, for all its posturing and games, a Roman feast is also about community, gratitude, and the fragile hope that, for one night, everyone can set their burdens aside. Then, as the last notes fade, the host, never one to let things get too solemn, claps his hands and signals the return of mischief. Now that the gods have had their fill, let's not let the rest go to waste. He laughs, and the banqueters are quick to oblige. The platters of offerings are swept back into the feast. Someone proposes a toast to Mercury, god of thieves and tricksters, in hopes of recovering the best bites before the night ends.
Fringe tidbit: at some gatherings, guests would compete to craft the cleverest or most outrageous offering. A honey cake shaped like a temple, a fig disguised as a fish, or a little cup of wine, borrowed from a rival's glass.
The best creations might be praised by the host, displayed on the altar, or secretly devoured by the household cat before morning. As the last crumbs are shared and the candles burn low, you sense the unique blend of reverence and playfulness that defines the Roman approach to the divine. There are rules, yes, but also room for creativity, irreverence, and laughter. Even the sacred is not immune to satire at a Roman table, and you suspect the gods themselves would appreciate a good joke, so long as it's paired with a worthy libation.
Historians still debate how much faith and how much performance coloured these rituals. Some see them as empty gestures, others as evidence of a genuine longing for connection with something greater than the self.
Tonight, all you know is that the air feels lighter, your heart a little fuller, and that the feast in all its glorious oddity has become something more than a meal. It is, for a few golden hours, both a prayer and a party, equal parts homage and hilarity. As you recline, eyes half closed and the warmth of wine and community wrapping around you, you reflect that maybe, just maybe, this is what the gods really want. Not perfection, but gratitude, laughter, and the willingness to share a good story, especially if it ends with dessert. The rituals for the gods drift gently into memory as the candles burn low, but if you thought the evening's intrigue was over, you'd be mistaken. With the weight of ceremony lifted, conversation resumes in more intimate knots. Voices lower, glances sharper. Here among the dregs of wine and scattered fig seeds is where the other true business of the Roman banquet unfolds. Politics, deals, and delicate schemes, all served with a side of oysters and subtlety. The art of political banqueting is at its peak, and every raised cup might mask a secret offer. Every laugh could be a test of loyalty or intent.
Mainstream historical fact. Throughout Roman history, the banquet was one of the most effective and dangerous arenas for building alliances, brokering marriages, and laying the groundwork for tomorrow's decisions in the forum. Many a senator's rise or fall can be traced not to the Senate floor, but to the triclinium, where words flowed as freely as wine. Historians still argue whether the best deals were struck over honey cakes or behind closed doors, but the letters and satires of the age leave no doubt that the dining couch was as much a battlefield as any campaign. You see it in the way guests now group together. The merchant, ever the opportunist, leans in to whisper with a magistrate about next month's grain shipments. The senator, previously so jovial, now grows serious, his hand resting on the arm of a young, ambitious lawyer. Nearby, a pair of matrons exchange coded remarks about dowries, while a poet at the end of the table tests a new satirical verse, half joking, half probing for weaknesses. It's not all solemn plotting. Roman banquets are famous for their playfulness, and even the sharpest deal is likely to be wrapped in jest. Someone proposes a mock election for master of the desserts, and the candidates must bribe the assembled with bits of pastry, wit, or scandalous stories.
Laughter rolls across the couches, but you know the votes may be remembered long after the crumbs are swept away. Fringe tidbits, some hosts cultivated reputations for being kingmakers or matchmakers, their tables magnets for fortune seekers. Invitations to such banquets were currency in themselves, and the very act of being seen reclining with certain guests could shift public opinion.
One notorious hostess, it is said, could decide a trial's outcome by seating the defendant next to an influential juror, preferably after the third cup of wine. Tonight, the host seems particularly attuned to every glance and murmur. He orchestrates the serving of a rare dish, oysters from the distant coast, and watches as the room buzzes with new energy. Oysters, rumoured to grant both eloquence and ambition, are passed around like coins. A matron raises her glass and toasts to fruitful negotiations and long memories, her eyes lingering on the merchant just a beat too long. The mood is both convivial and calculating. You notice how gifts are exchanged with subtlety. A box of sugared almonds for a senator's support, a rare perfume for a magistrate's favour, a whispered promise of influence in return for a seat at next month's feast. Even gossip becomes a kind of currency, every guest angling for news that can be traded, twisted, or tucked away for later use. Historians still debate whether these banquets were the engine of Rome's rise, or its undoing. Did the endless carrying of favour and subtle backstabbing strengthen the empire, binding it with ties of friendship and obligation? Or did it rot the core, breeding a culture where appearance mattered more than virtue, and the sharpest tongue triumphed over the bravest heart? The games of alliance and sabotage play out beneath the surface. A guest might be drawn into a whispered conversation about a rival's debts, or gently offered the chance to sponsor a new public building, for the good of Rome, of course, but with a hefty expectation of return. There are jokes about loyalty as long as the fish sauce holds out, and more than one guest is overheard declaring they would trade their best slave for a reliable informant. Fringe tidbit: on occasion, these political undercurrents bubbled into outright scandal. There are stories of secret letters exchanged under the table, coded gestures agreed upon in advance, and in one infamous case, a senator whose elaborate toast was actually a signal for his allies to stage a walkout from a rival's banquet, plunging the evening, and the next day's Senate session, into chaos. As the hour grows late, the host brings the room back to harmony with a final toast. To Rome may our words tonight bear sweeter fruit than our olives, and may our friendships last longer than our hangovers. Glasses are lifted, rivalries momentarily set aside, and you can almost believe, just for a heartbeat, that the banquet has woven a new network of trust and kinship. But as the candles gutter and guests drift out in twos and threes, you can't help but wonder what new deals were sealed, what old feuds rekindled, and how many of tonight's cheerful toasts will echo in tomorrow's power plays. For in Rome, the feast is never just about food. It is a stage, a court, and sometimes a battlefield, where words are sharper than knives, and every course comes with a side of intrigue. You recline a little deeper as the night wears on, belly content, mind spinning with political undercurrents. But now the conversation drifts toward stories, those legends and scandals of banquets past that have survived in Roman literature. There's a certain hush of anticipation when the poet clears his throat, ready to regale the company with tales both real and exaggerated. You realize that every Roman banquet is haunted not only by rivalry and ambition, but also by the memories, truthful, embellished, or outright fabricated, of feasts long past. Mainstream historical fact: Roman writers loved nothing more than to document and embellish the excesses and absurdities of their own banqueting culture. From the biting satires of Juvenal to the lush, almost surreal descriptions in Petronius's Satyricon, these accounts mix fact, rumor, and wishful thinking. Historians still argue where the line is between eyewitness reporting and wild literary invention. Was that dish really made of peacock brains? Or is the author just having a little fun at the host's expense? The poet launches into a tale from Petronius, the infamous banquet of Trimalchio. The guests laugh and shudder as he describes dishes shaped like the signs of the zodiac, a wild boar stuffed with thrushes, and a host so absurdly rich he times his courses by the stroke of a silver clock. The merchant, not to be outdone, recalls the legend of a senator who faked a food shortage to drive up prices, only to be caught when a guest found his storeroom overflowing with anchovies and apples. There's a round of good-natured groaning. Everyone knows someone who hoards, whether food or gossip. Fringe tidbit: some tales are so outrageous you suspect they must be true, like the one about the hostess who served her guests fish that glowed in the dark, or the feast where the dessert course consisted of tiny edible sculptures of every guest in attendance, rendered in marzipan and candied violets. The historian solemnly assures you that at least half of this actually happened, but the twinkle in her eye gives her away. The matron across the table tells a gentler story, remembering a feast where an entire garden was transplanted into the triclinium overnight, trees, birds, and all, so that guests dined among nightingales and falling petals. The slaves worked through the night, she says, but in the morning the host declared that the garden must remain, only to discover that the birds had eaten all the dessert by sunrise. Laughter ripples, sweetened by nostalgia. The tales aren't all about excess. Some are cautionary, others quietly rebellious. There's the story of the young poet who disguised himself as a slave to sneak into a banquet, only to be discovered when he bested the senator's own son in a battle of riddles. Another guest remembers a scandal in which a famous general, bored by the parade of strange foods, ordered the kitchen to bring him nothing but lentils and figs all night, a move that shocked the host but delighted the simpler diners. Historians still debate the function of these stories. Were they warnings against pride and folly, sly social commentary, or just the ancient version of dinner-table gossip? Whatever their purpose, tonight you see their power, how each tale draws laughter, admiration, or a scandalized gasp, forging a bond between storyteller and listener that lasts long after the last cup is drained. As the stories spiral outward, you notice the host encouraging the shyest guests to join in. One, blushing, recounts the night he accidentally spilled wine on a senator's wife, only to have her repay him with a surprise verse at the next banquet. Another boasts of a feast where a trained monkey stole the dessert and earned more applause than the poet of the hour. Fringe tidbit. It was not unheard of for hosts to hire professional storytellers or mimes to act out notorious banquet scenes for their guests, sometimes lampooning their rivals or even themselves for a laugh. More than one politician's career was bruised by a biting performance at a well-attended feast. As the night draws on, the stories grow wilder, the jokes a little sharper, and the nostalgia richer. There's an understanding that these tales, no matter how exaggerated, form the true legacy of Roman banqueting. Each one is a thread in the great tapestry of the city's memory, to be woven, unravelled, and rewoven with every retelling. Historians still argue over which stories are closest to the truth, but here and now, with lamplight flickering and friends reclined beside you, it hardly matters. The line between fact and fiction is blurred by the warmth of wine and the power of imagination. As you lean back and listen to the next story, you realize that tonight, you too have become part of this living tradition, a guest at a banquet that will be remembered, retold, and perhaps in time, exaggerated until it sounds stranger than any legend before it. The laughter from the evening stories lingers in the hazy air, and you notice a new feeling creeping over the company, a slow, sweet drowsiness that softens every voice and turns every movement languid. Some guests shift deeper into their cushions, others absent-mindedly pick at the last of the candied almonds, and more than a few rest their heads against friendly shoulders. But just as sleep seems inevitable, the host signals for one final round of amusements, a gentle coda to the night's endless variety. Tonight's finale is the Parlour of Dreams, an old-fashioned Roman custom, half party game and half social experiment. The host invites each guest to share a dream or omen they've recently experienced, or, for the more inventive among the group, to invent a new one on the spot. Mainstream historical fact: dreams and omens carried real weight in Roman society, believed to be messages from the gods or warnings about the future. It was not uncommon for dinner conversation to turn, in the wee hours, to dream interpretation, astrology, and the supernatural. Some families even hired professional dream readers to advise them before important feasts or business ventures. As the first guest clears her throat and begins, the room quiets. She describes a dream of a golden eagle soaring above the forum, dropping laurel leaves on the heads of children. The poet, instantly alert, interprets it as a sign of victory and renewal, and a senator jokes that it must mean her family will win every election next year. A merchant follows, claiming he dreamt of his ships arriving in port, their sails full of sweet-smelling wind, a certain promise, he says, of prosperity to come. Fringe tidbit: some Romans believed you could influence your dreams by tucking special herbs under your pillow, bay leaves for wisdom, poppy seeds for vivid visions, or sprigs of rue to ward off nightmares. There's a burst of laughter when the matron confesses she only dreams of honey cakes if she eats too many at dessert. The stories grow stranger as the circle moves on. The historian recounts a recurring dream of arguing with a statue in the Senate, always losing to its silent stare. The host turns this into a joke about the stubbornness of marble and senators, prompting gentle teasing from the older guests. I hope I was at least a lion, the poet demands. Or a wise old owl, the merchant counters. The room erupts with sleepy giggles. Historians still argue whether these dream circles were acts of genuine belief or clever tools for social bonding, perhaps a little of both. In Rome, dreams could be used to flatter a host, hint at ambitions, or even warn a rival in code.
Some letters from the period suggest that the right dream, shared at the right time, could influence everything from business deals to marriage negotiations. Tonight, the ritual feels both magical and deeply human. A hush falls as the host's youngest daughter, barely 10, shares a dream about a silver fish swimming through clouds, leading her to a garden where every tree grows a different kind of sweet.
The slaves, lingering at the edges, listen with smiles. One is gently invited to share a dream as well, and shyly recalls the scent of bread baking and the hope of a warm bed. Fringe tidbit: in especially superstitious households, the dreams told at banquets were written down and compared year after year. Some even kept dream books to trace patterns and portents. There are records of families basing major decisions, from house renovations to journeys abroad, on the wisest dream revealed after dessert. The last stories fade into a gentle quiet. The host, satisfied, raises his cup one final time, not for a toast, but as a salute to the mysterious, often ridiculous, and always enchanting world of dreams. The poet sums it up: tonight, our bellies are full, our hearts are light, and the future, well, at least we can dream it sweet. As you settle into your cushion, drowsy but happy, you sense the unity of the room. 100 stories, real and imagined, binding the company together more firmly than any alliance or rivalry ever could.
In the soft lamplight, with the last honey cakes vanishing and the candles flickering low, it's easy to believe the ancient Romans knew what they were doing after all. The night is almost done. But for now, you drift with the others in that delicious space between waking and sleep, where every story is true and every dream feels possible. The banqueters recline deeper, voices hushed to murmurs, and you feel the dreamy comfort of shared stories and full bellies weaving a blanket over the room. The torches are burning low, casting long shadows on the mosaics, and the once rowdy triclinium has become almost tender. Yet before the evening can truly dissolve into sleep, the Romans indulge one last odd tradition: divination by leftovers. It's a finale both playful and superstitious, and you find yourself swept up in its strange logic. Mainstream historical fact: divining the future from the remains of a feast was not uncommon in Rome. From reading patterns in wine dregs lecanomancy to finding omens in bread crusts, fruit pits, or even bones. These rituals offered a final chance to squeeze wisdom from the night's excesses. Historians still argue whether guests truly believed in these portents, or simply enjoyed the thrill of reading their fortunes over the ruins of a good meal. Tonight, the host's wife produces a polished silver bowl, setting it in the center of the table. Each guest is invited to drop in a bit of their leftover bread, fruit peel, or nutshell. The last gifts to fortune, she calls them. Winking, a slave stirs the contents with a sprig of rosemary, while the host, adopting a mock-serious tone, peers into the bowl. "Let us see what the fates have left for us," he intones to delighted laughter. The first reading is for the merchant. The host lifts a crescent of bread, pronouncing it a sign of prosperity and new ventures, and the merchant bows in exaggerated gratitude. The senator's apple core, floating next, is declared a portent of long journeys and much debate, at least as long as the matron's cluster of almond shells, tangled like a tiny raft, is teased as an omen of safe passage across stormy seas, or perhaps just the Tiber after too much wine.
Fringe tidbit: some Romans took this end-of-feast augury seriously, employing household priests or haruspices, diviners, to read fortunes with grave faces. Others treated it as a light-hearted game, inventing omens on the spot. In one legendary feast, a hostess supposedly predicted her rival's exile after finding 3 cherry pits clinging together in the wine bowl, though it's just as likely she planted them herself for dramatic effect. Your own fortune is up next. The host fishes out a sliver of fig, and after a moment's pondering declares, "A sweet ending and a fruitful new beginning, unless of course you leave figs in your sandals again." The company laughs, and you accept your fate with a gracious bow. Even the slaves are drawn into the fun. The youngest, persuaded to offer a date stone, is told it means an unexpected treat before sunrise. As the bowl empties, the fortunes grow more creative. Someone's bread crust promises loyal friends and stubborn heels. A twist of lemon peel is read as adventures far from home, or perhaps just a new recipe in the kitchen. The poet receives a walnut shell, pronounced a mind hard to crack but full of sweet words, which he accepts with a flourishing bow and a whispered rhyme about banquets and blessings. Historians still debate the origins and seriousness of these rituals. Were they born from genuine belief, borrowed from older Etruscan or Greek practices, or simply an excuse to squeeze a few more laughs from the night? Whatever the roots, tonight the game knits the company together one last time, lightening any final rivalries and soothing the edge of earlier debates. Fringe tidbit: in some houses, leftover omens were written down in a banquet book and revisited at the next gathering, with guests gleefully recounting whether the predictions had come true. There are records of marriages, business deals, and even minor scandals being blamed or credited to the prophecies of a particularly memorable dessert bowl. As the last fortune is read, the host's wife gathers up the bowl, promising to keep the best omens for luck. The guests toast to fortunes found and fortunes forgotten, and the candles are snuffed one by one. The host offers a gentle benediction. May the remains of this night bring you sweetness, laughter, and dreams without end. The triclinium fills with quiet thank yous and the shuffling of feet as guests prepare to rise. You recline a moment longer, savouring the warmth and gentle nonsense of this odd custom. The games, the omens, and the shared exhaustion bind the company together more surely than any wine or honey cake. Tomorrow, when the sun returns and the bustle of the city resumes, you'll remember this, how for a few hours the world shrank to a circle of friends divining hope from crumbs and peels. With a soft sigh, you let the last laughter of the night wash over you, content in the knowledge that you've truly lived the oddities and magic of an ancient Roman banquet, right down to the final, silly, perfect ritual. It's well past midnight now, and as the last fortune is declared and the final toast is made, a gentle transformation sweeps the triclinium. The clamour of feasting and the wildness of the games melt away, replaced by a hushed, drowsy camaraderie. Some guests are already dozing, their heads cradled on cushions, while others rise and stretch, their movement slow and deliberate, as if sleepwalking through the marble halls. Even the host's voice softens, carrying the company through this liminal hour, a moment when the boundary between waking and dreaming seems thinner than ever. The musicians return one final time, not with raucous songs or clever toasts, but with melodies as gentle as a lullaby. The lyre's notes ripple through the room, mingling with the scent of candle smoke and lingering traces of honey and wine. Someone begins to hum, and soon others join in, their voices a low chorus, more felt than heard. Mainstream historical fact: music was present at every stage of a Roman banquet, but the closing songs were special, meant to soothe, unify, and help guests make the transition from revelry to repose. The most favoured pieces were slow, familiar airs, sometimes invoking the blessings of the gods, sometimes nothing more than wordless comfort. The slaves, relieved that the worst of the night is behind them, begin to clear away the platters and goblets. Some guests offer quiet thanks, a nod, or a sleepy joke. One matron teases her husband, claiming she'll dream of roasted boar and clever poets for a month. The poet, not to be outdone, composes a whispered verse on the spot. Let sleep's gentle net catch each guest tonight, and may we feast in dreams till morning's light. There's a round of sleepy applause. Fringe tidbit: it was not unusual for Roman hosts to offer departing gifts, small tokens like perfume vials, silver spoons, or even simple breads, meant to carry a piece of the banquet's goodwill into the days ahead. Some especially superstitious guests would pocket a sprig of rosemary or a leftover date pit, convinced it would bring luck until the next feast. There are even stories of guests sneaking away with a cushion or two, for memory's sake. Tonight the host's wife moves quietly among the guests, handing out tiny bundles of lavender and mint, each tied with coloured thread. For pleasant dreams, she murmurs, and everyone tucks them into their sleeves or under their pillows, the scent promising a peaceful night. You inhale deeply, the fragrance mingling with the music, and feel the weight of exhaustion slip into something softer, a floating, feather-light contentment. Historians still debate whether these gestures were practical hospitality or acts of subtle social magic. Some say the gifts cemented bonds of friendship, ensuring that each guest would remember the warmth and generosity of the house. Others believe it was one more layer of ritual, a way to guide the transition from feast to sleep, with as much care as the opening hand-washing or the mid-meal toasts. As the final song fades, the slaves dim the lamps, leaving only the faintest golden glow in the corners. The host, his own eyes drooping now, thanks each guest for their presence and wit, for making the night a story worth retelling. There are promises to meet again, gentle jokes about next time's menu, and half-dreamed plans whispered in the shadows. You sense, beneath the calm, the certainty that every Roman banquet is both an ending and a beginning, a promise that the circle of friends and rivals will gather again, different perhaps, but bound together by the memory of nights like this. Fringe tidbit: in some houses the tradition was to end with a simple prayer, not to the gods of wine or feasting, but to Somnus, the god of sleep. A single line is murmured by all: let sleep come gently and carry all trouble away. It's a soft, soothing invocation, perfectly suited to the peaceful mood of the hour. As you recline deeper into your cushion, the scent of lavender rising, the music fading, and the world slipping away, you realize you've made it to the very last oddity of the Roman banquet. The art of saying good night, not with words, but with every sense gently lulled, every worry set aside, every story wrapped up in the softest, sweetest sleep. The last lamps flicker and wink out, but the spell of the Roman banquet lingers like perfume in the darkness. You stretch and yawn, feeling the soft comfort of the cushion beneath you, surrounded by the quiet breathing of friends and strangers who just hours before were rivals for the best joke, the most daring toast, or the choicest bite of honey cake. Now as sleep edges closer, you become aware of a new intimacy in the room, a gentle peace that settles in when no one needs to speak or impress or remember any rule but rest. A few guests have already slipped away, gathering their gifts and bidding the host farewell with soft, heartfelt gratitude. The door closes quietly behind them, the echo barely reaching the dreamy centre of the triclinium. The remaining guests, reluctant to break the spell, linger on their couches, gazing into the dimness as if trying to capture every last detail, the mosaics glimmering in shadow, the scent of lavender clinging to linen, the distant night sounds of the city beyond the garden walls. Mainstream historical fact: in wealthy Roman households, it wasn't unusual for some guests to spend the night after an especially grand feast. Travel after dark could be dangerous, and a gracious host always kept a few rooms or at least extra couches and blankets at the ready for those who wished to stay. The final act of hospitality was to ensure every guest, sated and sleepy, found safety and comfort before the house itself retired. Tonight, your host gently offers the option to stay. Slaves glide through the room, guiding the weary to their sleeping quarters, bringing bowls of cool water to wash away the traces of wine and sweat, laying out fresh linens, and for those who ask, a cup of warm honeyed milk. The poet mumbles a blessing for sweet dreams and clever verses at dawn. The matron who once sparred with him now settles a blanket over his shoulders, her earlier rivalry replaced by a sleepy camaraderie that only such nights can create. At fringe tidbit, it was common for Roman hosts to set out a night table for lingering guests, a simple spread of bread, cheese, dried fruit, and water, meant to comfort midnight hunger or soothe an anxious mind. Some left gentle notes on wax tablets, "Rest well, friend," or "May the gods guard your dreams," and others, if very close, exchanged whispered confidences or apologies for jests made too sharply earlier in the night. As you settle into your borrowed bed, your thoughts drift to the events of the evening. The taste of roasted boar, the thrill of a clever riddle answered, the warmth of laughter echoing off painted walls. Outside, a soft breeze lifts the garden curtains and brings the faint chirping of cicadas, blending with the rhythm of deep, even breaths around you. There is no rank here now, no senator or slave, just tired bodies and quiet hearts. Historians still argue about the true nature of Roman hospitality. Was it calculated? Another chance to secure alliances, extend debts, or display wealth? Or did it spring from something older and more genuine? A recognition that, in a world so filled with danger and ambition, the chance to offer rest and safety was the greatest kindness of all. Tonight, in the dark hush after the feast, it hardly matters. Kindness, in its simplest form, is all that remains. Fringe tidbit: some Romans believed that the house itself retained memories of each feast. Every song, every secret, every argument or apology, imprinted on its stones and woodwork, haunting the halls with a gentle echo long after the guests had gone. It was said that the next morning a sensitive host might find the air tinged with laughter, or the faint scent of wine in the sunlight, as if the house itself was remembering. You let yourself drift, the linen cool against your skin, the hush of the house settling in your bones. Tomorrow, life will return with its demands and ambitions, but tonight you are simply a guest at rest, grateful and content. The greatest oddity of the Roman banquet is not the food or the games or the politics, but this, the way it draws strangers together and dissolves every difference in the shared surrender to sleep. As you close your eyes, you carry with you the memory of warmth, laughter, and stories, a softness that will linger, like all the best Roman feasts, long after the last lamp has been extinguished. Dawn creeps quietly into the corners of the sleeping house. You're half awake before the first birds begin their tentative song in the garden beyond the atrium, but for a moment the gentle hush remains unbroken. You open your eyes to the silver grey of early light painting the walls and the low rhythmic sounds of friends and fellow banqueters stirring all around you. Somewhere nearby, a sleepy slave glides from room to room, drawing aside the curtains and laying out bowls of water, the old rituals for a new day.
No one rushes. There's no bell or trumpet, only the soft music of a household coming slowly back to life after an evening spent in laughter, indulgence, and deep companionship.
Mainstream historical fact. Romans believed that how one ended a banquet was almost as important as how it began. The art of parting valediction was its own ceremony, meant to smooth the way for good fortune, protect against hangovers, and preserve the warm memory of friendship for days to come. One by one, the guests rise, stretching and groaning, reaching for slippers and rubbing the sleep from their eyes. The host appears, wrapped in a soft woolen cloak, looking a little rumpled, but still the perfect picture of Roman dignity. He greets each guest personally, asking after their comfort, exchanging sleepy jokes about wild dreams and full bellies. If you dreamt of peacock tongues, he laughs, I'll know who's to blame for the empty pantry. Fringe tidbit, some Roman houses had a tradition called the morning round, a last circle of bread, cheese and watered wine, taken together before everyone departed. The host would lead a simple toast, may the gods guard you on your way, and may our next feast be even sweeter. Some guests might leave with a scrap of honeyed cake tucked in their satchel, or a laurel sprig for luck. As the morning meal is quietly laid out, guests help themselves to bites of bread, a little cheese, a few slices of apple or fig. Conversation is subdued, voices lower, and every so often someone pauses to recall a favourite moment from the night before, a clever toast, a scandalous joke, the poet's impromptu verse. There is a warmth that lingers, even among rivals, whatever contests or ambitions simmered during the feast. They're softened by this simple, gentle morning. The slaves work quietly, clearing beds and refilling water jars, collecting stray garlands and half-read omens from the fortune bowl. The poet teases the historian about her dream statue debate while the merchant plots his day's business, but no one is in a hurry to leave. The host's wife distributes little bundles of herbs, rosemary for remembrance, mint for clarity, lavender for peace, to each guest as they ready themselves for the journey ahead. Historians still argue whether these morning rituals were about extending hospitality or simply buying a little more goodwill before the guests return to their worlds of politics and trade. But to you it feels like the softest form of magic, a quiet spell to hold the joys of the night just a little longer. Before you depart, there is one last custom. The host walks each guest to the door, offering a personal farewell. You are always welcome here, he says. May you have stories to tell and friends to share them with. There is a sense of having crossed a threshold, not only of time, but of connection. The bonds forged over food, jokes and shared exhaustion feel real, as if you are leaving not just a house, but a new chapter in your own story. Fringe tidbit. Some Romans, ever the superstitious lot, would step carefully over the threshold when leaving, muttering a charm to ensure they'd one day return. The household gods, it was said, took note of every guest and would be displeased if a friendship ended in bad faith or without a proper goodbye. You step out into the cool morning air, a little heavier with memories but lighter in spirit. The city wakes around you, its bustle a distant hum, as you walk homeward, still tasting somewhere on your tongue the honey and laughter of the night before. You know that stories of this banquet will grow with every retelling, acquiring new flavours and oddities, until even you are not quite sure which details are fact and which are invention. But that, you realise, is the true gift of the Roman banquet. Not just the food or the spectacle, not even the cleverness or competition, but the transformation of strangers into friends, rivals into confidants, and a simple evening into a legend that lingers, gentle and bright, long after the last lamp has gone out. So now, as you slip away from the memory of Rome's strangest, sweetest banqueting hours, let yourself sink just a little deeper into your pillow. The clamour of the feast has faded. The jokes, the politics, the crunch of bread and the clink of goblets are only soft echoes now, drifting away like mist at sunrise. You feel the gentle heaviness of a night well spent, the warmth of a story that wraps around you like a soft blanket, every word and whisper spun into the quietest lullaby. The hush of the triclinium lingers in your mind, a place where laughter mingles with lamplight, and everyone from senator to slave finds a moment of rest beneath a common roof. You remember the scent of lavender and honey, the faded laughter of friends old and new, and the way even strangers could become allies by the light of a single candle. There's comfort in the odd rituals and peculiar fare in the way every shared meal promises, if only for a night, a world without rivalry or worry. Let the images fade, the silver bowl of omens, the flicker of torches on ancient mosaics, the quiet touch of a friend's hand as sleep overtakes the whole house. Every story, every crumb, every game now melts into a gentle blur. You are safe, wrapped in the knowledge that, even in a world as complicated as ancient Rome, there is always time for rest, always room at the table for dreams. Breathe deeply, let your mind drift, and allow the echoes of the feast to carry you into an easy, restful sleep. Tomorrow will come soon enough, but for now, stay just a little longer in the company of gentle laughter, soft lamplight, and the hush that follows the oddest, most wonderful of banquets.